Here at Intrasoft, if there is one concept that describes who we are and what we do, it is innovation. That is the single word that captures the true essence of our efforts. But what is the true meaning of innovation? Is it just a vague definition? Is it a badge on the shirt of an employee? Or is it a poster on the cafeteria wall? No. Innovation constitutes the backbone of our corporate DNA. We are practically made of it. We live by it. We breathe it. And it can be easily summed up in two simple words: question everything. One solution against another. One idea against another. The better for the good. The best for the better. Nothing less, nothing more. It is our team of creative thinkers that gets us there. People who know that in order to agree, they must first see things differently. The 1,700 IT professionals of 20 different nationalities across the Intrasoft group are the people behind all the innovative breakthrough technology products and services we deliver across 70 countries. From our cutting-edge e-customs technologies to digital analytics solutions, our people know well that innovation, first and foremost, is an exercise for daring hearts and brains. A leap out of one's comfort zone. Innovative minds are the reason we grow strong for the last 20 years. Because innovation is not written, it is coded into our DNA.
Για περισσότερα από 30 χρόνια, το Ινστιτούτο Βιομηχανικής Εκπαίδευσης και Κατάρτισης προσφέρει γνώσεις και δεξιότητες για πρωτοπορία. Με προγράμματα προσαρμοσμένα στις ανάγκες των συνεργατών μας, εκπαιδευόμενων και επιχειρήσεων. Προγράμματα που ενσωματώνουν την καινοτομία και εξωστρέφεια, που αναδεικνύουν δεξιότητες, συνδέουν τη γνώση με την αγορά εργασίας, προετοιμάζουν για τις εξελίξεις. Με παραρτήματα και σύγχρονες δομές που διασφαλίζουν την ποιότητα και αρτιότητα των υπηρεσιών μας σε κάθε γωνιά της χώρας μας. Διεθνείς πιστοποιήσεις και διαπιστεύσεις που επιβραβεύουν τη δράση μας και επισφραγίζουν την ποιότητά μας. Εφαρμοσμένη τεχνολογία μάθησης. Υπερσύγχρονα, πιστοποιημένα εργαστήρια για άμεση και μεθοδευμένη αλλαγή του τρόπου δουλειάς. Συνδέουμε τη θεωρία με την πράξη. Την πράξη με το αποτέλεσμα. ΙΒΠ. γνώσεις και δεξιότητες για πρωτοπορία.
Intrasoft, if there is one concept that describes who we are and what we do, it is innovation. That is the single word that captures the true essence of our efforts. But what is the true meaning of innovation? Is it just a vague definition? Is it a badge on the shirt of an employee? Or is it a poster on the cafeteria wall? No. Innovation constitutes the backbone of our corporate DNA. We are practically made of it. We live by it. We breathe it. And it can be easily summed up in two simple words: question everything. One solution against another. One idea against another. The better for the good. The best for the better. Nothing less, nothing more. It is our team of creative thinkers that gets us there. People who know that in order to agree, they must first see things differently. The 1,700 IT professionals of 20 different nationalities across the Intrasoft group are the people behind all the innovative breakthrough technology products and services we deliver across 70 countries. From our cutting-edge e-customs technologies to digital analytics solutions, our people know well that innovation, first and foremost, is an exercise for daring hearts and brains. A leap out of one's comfort zone. Innovative minds are the reason we grow strong for the last 20 years. Because innovation is not written, it is coded into our DNA.
Για περισσότερα από 30 χρόνια, το Ινστιτούτο Βιομηχανικής Εκπαίδευσης και Κατάρτισης προσφέρει γνώσεις και δεξιότητες για πρωτοπορία. Με προγράμματα προσαρμοσμένα στις ανάγκες των συνεργατών μας, εκπαιδευόμενων και επιχειρήσεων. Προγράμματα που ενσωματώνουν την καινοτομία και εξωστρέφεια, που αναδεικνύουν δεξιότητες, συνδέουν τη γνώση με την αγορά εργασίας, προετοιμάζουν για τις εξελίξεις. Με παραρτήματα και σύγχρονες δομές που διασφαλίζουν την ποιότητα και αρτιότητα των υπηρεσιών μας σε κάθε γωνιά της χώρας μας. Διεθνείς πιστοποιήσεις και διαπιστεύσεις που επιβραβεύουν τη δράση μας και επισφραγίζουν την ποιότητά μας. Εφαρμοσμένη τεχνολογία μάθησης. Υπερσύγχρονα, πιστοποιημένα εργαστήρια για άμεση και μεθοδευμένη αλλαγή του. Συνδέουμε τη θεωρία με την πράξη. Την πράξη με το αποτέλεσμα. ΙΒΠ. Γνώσεις και δεξιότητες για πρωτοπορία.
Konstantinos Doxiadis was a Greek architect, urban planner, and thinker. Among his hundreds of projects, he designed new cities, influencing the lives of millions of people in countries across the globe. Doxiadis was born in 1913 in Stenimikos, in southern Bulgaria, though soon after his family was displaced to Greece. In 1940, he fought for the defense of his country from fascist attack. In post-war years, he masterminded the reconstruction of the ravaged country. He later claimed that the experiences of childhood displacement and reconstruction were the two main influences in his working philosophy. Doxiadis' projects in more than 40 countries ranged from the design of large-scale buildings to the design of new cities to the settlement programs for whole countries. In a pioneering step, Doxiadis conceived of planning as a multidisciplinary science.
We have nature and man and society and the networks and the shells. 5 elements, but they can be seen in several ways. I mentioned already several. The economist can see it in one way. The social worker, the administrator, the technologist, or the one interested in cultural problems, aesthetic problems.
One of Doxiadis' central beliefs was what he called the human scale. He refused to allow high-rise buildings in his plans, believing in the concept of the neighborhood. He was one of the first to speak of the dangers of man-made pollution. In order to curtail it, he developed a vision of digital networking that would decrease physical machine-based traffic. The technology for it was invented years after his death in 1975.
Being an entrepreneur is a bug. It's an affliction I always had in my life. You see, you shouldn't lose sight of your purpose. What is your purpose? I want to build a company that is at least as good as the company that Thomas Edison did. The first thing that led to MIT was when I decided what country I wanted to build that company. When I wanted to pick my thesis, what I want to do is to work in preparing for my creation of my company, based on my inventions. The invention that I came up with for that company is to convert heat into electricity by boiling off electrons. For the first time, MIT used its own money to support my thesis. I turned the pages of the New York Times and found that the disease that killed more Americans every year is heart problems. I decided right there, that's our next business. We're gonna make an artificial heart. It's useful to set a certain direction you want to go. After you set the direction, don't focus in your goal. Focus in enjoying the ride.
Γεια σας, είμαι ο Στέφανος Τσιπάς και θέλω να εκφράσω τη στήριξή μου στους Innovative Greeks σε όλο τον κόσμο. Η δημιουργικότητα και το business είναι θέματα που με ενδιαφέρουν πάρα πολύ και είμαι χαρούμενος ότι υπάρχουν νέοι Έλληνες που θέλουν να γίνουν ηγέτες ώστε να βοηθήσουν την πατρίδα. Καλή επιτυχία!
Γεια σας, είμαι η Μαρία Σάκαρη. Θέλω να εκφράσω την στήριξή μου στους Innovative Greeks σε όλο τον κόσμο. πολλούς από αυτούς γνωρίζω στα τουρνουά που έρχονται και με στηρίζουν στους αγώνες μου και εγώ με τη σειρά μου θα να τους φέρω πιο κοντά στην Ελλάδα. Καλή τύχη!
Hi, George Stephanopoulos here, wishing best of luck to the Innovative Greeks community. I know you're coming together for the future of Greece, for the future of the Greek diaspora in a creative, entrepreneurial way that we hope will create great success for Greeks everywhere. Good luck.
Εκ μέρους του Greek Tech θέλω να ευχηθώ καλή επιτυχία στο Innovative Greeks event που διοργανώνουν ο ΣΕΒ και η Endeavor Greece την ερχόμενη εβδομάδα. Και θέλω να καλέσω τα μέλη μας να συμμετάσχουν σε αυτή την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα διοργάνωση. Είναι σημαντικό που ο κεντρικός φορέας της επιχειρηματικότητας στην Ελλάδα φέρνει για πρώτη φορά τους καινοτόμους Έλληνες όλου του κόσμου κοντά.
On behalf of our board of directors, our dedicated staff, and the thousands of donors around the globe, we'd like to thank Innovative Greeks for asking us to be part of this conference and to wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
We are so thrilled to be part of this conference organized by Innovative Greeks, and we can't wait to hear from this incredible cast of luminaries to recognize how far we've come and also how we forge a path forward. Best wishes to all.
I was thinking about all the things that define us as Greeks and came up with my top 10, so if you'll indulge me, I'll share them with you. The number 10 best reason is that we're popular and generally considered cool. Everyone you meet tells you they had a best friend in college, or the kid down the street's mother made the best glika, or the athlete or musician or teacher that inspired them. It seems we leave lasting impressions, and they're almost always flattering. Reason number 9 is that Greeks are passionate, which is why when you get two Greeks together, you have three opinions. And no one argues like the Greeks. It's sometimes a fierce argument, even screaming and yelling, which to the non-Greek observer appears very serious and substantial. But for the Greeks, once they decide what movie they're going to, or who sells the best feta, or whatever the argument was about, they move on without a second thought, leaving bystanders very confused about what just happened. The 8th reason is that you can always get a great meal if you're Greek. At home, at a relative's house, at a great restaurant, or especially in New York at a diner on virtually any corner, where if they find out you're Greek, there's always a little extra on the plate. 7th reason is that you can go to a friend's house, get completely drunk on his alcohol, play his music too loud, smash all his plates, and he cheers you on and invites you back, particularly if it's his name day. Now, who else does that? The 6th reason is that we're great lovers and hopeless romantics. And as we go through life, we inevitably break hearts, have ours broken, until we find the right person, as I did, who makes it all worth it. The 5th reason is that every time you go to dinner with Greek friends, you have a great time. That's despite the fact that it includes elaborate plotting about how you will get to pay the check before they do, and usually ends in a great scene and a fight over the bill, which is a dramatic flourish to the evening that only Greeks can do. But it ends with everyone laughing and hugging and plotting the next dinner. The 4th best reason is that when non-Greek prospective tourists tell us how excited they are to be going to Mykonos and Santorini, we get to smugly tell them about all the other amazing places they'll be missing. The 3rd reason is that we're intelligent and ambitious. And while we're driven to some extent by economic success and glory, for the most part, we do it out of a sense of pride, for the accomplishment, to make our parents and families proud, and to prove that Greeks can and do excel at whatever they put their minds to. The 2nd best reason is that we deeply value our relationships, our families, our friends, and their families and friends. We stick together, we look out for each other, which is what makes an event like this so wonderful, to see so many of us gather to share our thoughts on being Hellenes and to discuss the future of the country we deeply love. And finally, the best reason to be proud of being Greek, evidenced by this event, is to believe that the best years of Greece were not just the massive contribution of our ancient ancestors, but the great future years ahead. Thank you very much.
Welcome, innovative Greeks. A couple of months ago, this was nothing more than an idea between a few friends. And over the past few months, this has become an event where over the course of the next 2 days, more than 10,000 people have registered to watch.
Our motto is speak less and do more. That's why in 2018, we produced a study with more than 70 proposals to the Greek government.
And we're excited to kickstart Innovative Greeks with so many more organizations involved. The timing is perfect. 2020 was the best year for Greek innovation yet.
In some ways, we're scientific refugees. We as well have abandoned at one point in our lives reasonably predictable and well-defined academic scientific careers to go do something different.
Coming from my family, my roots, the focus on education, the belief that because I'm Greek, I could do anything. I could be a hero.
I really liked there's an inherent attraction of helping people and do it in a way that is transformational for their lives.
Welcome, everyone. This is our second panel of the day, and we have some amazing guests, most of which I know.
Now it's a golden opportunity that Silicon Valley is a mindset to really propel ourselves forward and do it in a way where everybody can partake.
Protocols around consumer data, the potential of technological infrastructure has changed so much. And so I think there is just really a moment now for these types of global businesses.
We do have universities, they produce lots of excellent talent. Somehow we need to be able to leverage those things, right?
There's a huge gap between having a new idea, a concept, let's say, something you can prove with a small experiment in the lab and write a paper about, to having a real product.
Scaling doesn't mean that new ventures should disavow their startup identities and embrace large company dogma once they're positioned for growth.
The talent oftentimes comes from universities in the form of founders, executives, and also engineers.
Many governments around the world, and most recently Greece, have recognized that encouraging production activity in their locations creates economic activity.
Two things that I think go hand in hand in Greece that I think this government has done a great job at getting ahead of is the banking system and the legal system.
The question that companies are trying to answer is how they can make their software developers more productive to be able to go faster and capture those opportunities.
You cannot get to all the markets, you cannot get to all the customers, and even if you get to, you cannot serve all of them.
The quality of the panelists we had the chance to witness a few minutes ago, who readily agreed to participate in this event, the fact that over 10,000 Greeks have already signed up to engage in the Innovative Greeks platform.
We saw 2 record-breaking exits last year. Microsoft acquired Softomotive and Delivery Hero acquired InstaShop. At the same time, your government has introduced many incentive schemes to enhance Greece's competitiveness as a place to live and work.
It is particularly important if we want to really change the country and think in terms of 10x rather than 10% incremental change, that we build a level of trust between the state, between the political elites, and between the citizens, which clearly was not there over, I'd say, many decades. And certainly that level of trust was actually shattered by the crisis.
Innovative Greeks aspires to turbocharge these trends. It is aiming to bring together the global community of Greeks working in tech, life sciences, or innovating in any other field. And let me take this opportunity on behalf of both Constanza and myself to publicly thank the Endeavour and SEV teams who have brought this initiative this far and set up this fantastic event.
Welcome back, Innovative Greeks. Yesterday was really a very special day for all of us. After a lot of hard work, and I have to thank Maggie, I have to thank Rosa, and I have to thank Katerina in particular, because it was a small team of very dedicated people. We made it happen. And it really felt like a new beginning. It felt like the beginning of a great adventure, almost. And it was so much full of optimism, inspiration, emotion, but also sort of felt like a collective or a virtual hug. I think all the things that a real community feels, we felt yesterday, with thousands of people watching us, and from the more sort of unpredictable places like Mexico or Japan, and of course all the big cities around the world. Now, yesterday I think we learned a few things that were new, and were reminded of certain things that we all know very well, but were spoken to and explained so beautifully that the impact was all the greater. And the first thing is the importance of role models. I think our first panel yesterday, with Stelios Papadopoulos moderating, everybody talked about this incident of their father giving them a clipping of Roy Vangelos, the CEO of Merck, and how this man became a role model for all of these people in the life sciences and the biotech space. And I think the same is true of people who followed George Hadjopoulos as a role model. And even my grandfather, who was an engineer and went to the States at the age of 16, Thomas Edison was his role model. And it's so great to begin having Greek role models in that sense. So the first thing was just role models, the importance. The second thing is, we have a saying in Greece that οι παρέες γράφουν ιστορία. So groups of people that stick together with common values can really change the world or write history. And that was so very true of Mr. Yankopoulos, Mr. Galakatos, Mr. Skangos, and Mr. Papadopoulos. They all worked together for years. They educated a whole class of people and young Greeks to become top in their field. And today, Mr. Yankopoulos has built a Regeneron, a company worth 45 billion. Mr. Papadopoulos is running Biogen, a company which is worth 43 billion. And Mr. Galakatos is probably the largest manager of life science funds in the world at Blackstone. And Mr. Skangos with Vir is really breaking new ground in every possible sense. So I guess, we also have our own PayPal mafias. And the message is, when there is a very healthy core, a very healthy group of people, this has the tendency to spread. And I've had the same experience myself with Upstream. Out of Upstream, there have been so many other companies built, Persado, Workable, now Brick. People like Panagiotis Vitakis are now managing Celonis. And it just grows and grows. It has an exponential effect. Οι παρέες πραγματικά γράφουν ιστορία. The third thing I wanted to bring up is we had some great ideas on the table in terms of how Greece can move faster. The first was actually from Victoria Coleman. Victoria spoke about Greece being the second largest spender in military expenses, defense, out of all the NATO members per capita, and how it would make sense for Greece to have a very strong research and business around that, something that we haven't ever really done. And she is an expert. She was the head of DARPA, after all, and she can help us in many different ways to not just do military research, but also dual use, things that can be useful beyond the military. So this was, a great moment in yesterday's discussion for food for thought. The other was Jim Yiannopoulos saying that, Greece could actually be an interesting place for the film industry, not to shoot movies so much, but to create post-production and digital sort of competences that do exist in Greece. Another great example of things that we could be doing. And many more interesting ideas. And finally, Christos Trifonas, who is one of the few serial entrepreneurs that we have in the tech space, shared with us, I think, a very interesting perspective, saying that one of the reasons that he sells a business and then wants to do another one, and then another one, and yet another one, because he's done 5, is that because every time he changes the domain and he finds it intellectually challenging, he also changes the teams, and it's almost an opportunity for him to reinvent himself. And I think that this is a glimpse into the future in the sense that none of us will be doing one thing in our lives, we'll be doing multiple things, multiple businesses, multiple opportunities to reinvent ourselves. So with that behind us, a wonderful first day, today we are more focused on Greece. Yesterday was more about our international Greeks. Today we will be focusing more on what is happening here. So we will start with a research that Dianeosis, which is one of the most reputable research think tanks in Greece that has done amazing work over the past few years, presenting the landscape of the ecosystem. Then we will move on to see a panel around our very own Greek heroes. So the entrepreneurs that I was thinking about when I said yesterday that sometimes the darker the night, the brighter the stars. These guys, against all odds, over the last 10 years, have managed to build significant businesses and attract foreign investors. Following that panel, we will move to some of the top investors around the world that have taken the leap and invested in those Greek businesses. And we'll hear their perspective as to why they did it, what more do we need to do to increase their exposure to our country, and have a very fruitful discussion around that topic that Apostolos Apostolakis, one of our top VCs, will be taking on to the next panel, which will be all about the Greek VC ecosystem and how they're investing in startups and what impact has this investment had. So I welcome everyone to this second day of Innovative Greeks, and we will start with the Dianeosis study and Theodoris Georgakopoulos, one of our best journalists and researchers.
Καλησπέρα σας και ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την πρόσκληση. Είμαι ο Θεοδωρής Γεωργακόπουλος και θα σας μιλήσω για μια καινούργια μελέτη της Διανέωσης για την έρευνα και την καινοτομία στην Ελλάδα. Μια ομάδα ερευνητών υπό το συντονισμό του Γιάννη Καλογύρου και του Άγγελου Τσακανίκα, που είναι καθηγητές στο Πολυτεχνείο, ανέλυσε το σύστημα καινοτομίας στην Ελλάδα σήμερα, ανέδειξε τα προβλήματά του και πρότεινε συγκεκριμένες λύσεις. Όλα όσα ακούσαμε χτες, τα οποία συνόψισε ο Μάρκος Βερέμης πριν πολύ ωραία και αποτελεσματικά, και όλα όσα θα ακούσουμε σήμερα σε αυτή την εξαιρετική εκδήλωση, έχουν να κάνουν με τη νέα οικονομία. Για τις δυναμικές εξωστρεφείς επιχειρήσεις, που παράγουν αξία, βασισμένες στην καινοτομία, για Έλληνες και ξένους χρηματοδότες που τις στηρίζουν. Ωραία πράγματα, πολύ εμπνευστικά. Σε αυτήν εδώ τη μικρή παρουσίαση, εγώ θα προσπαθήσω να σας περιγράψω το υπόβαθρο πάνω στο οποίο όλοι αυτοί οι δραστήριοι επιχειρηματίες καλούνται να στήσουν τις προσπάθειες και τις ιδέες τους. Οι επιχειρήσεις που καινοτομούν, οι πετυχημένες startups, οι ιδέες που αλλάζουν τον κόσμο, δεν εμφανίζονται σε κενό. Ή, για να το πω πιο σωστά, μπορεί μερικές φορές να εμφανίζονται σε κενό, αλλά συνήθως υποστηρίζονται από ένα ακμαίο και δραστήριο σύστημα καινοτομίας. Το σύστημα καινοτομίας κάθε χώρας ή περιοχής το συνθέτουν οι οργανισμοί που παράγουν γνώση, όπως τα πανεπιστήμια, τα ερευνητικά κέντρα, το εκπαιδευτικό σύστημα συνολικά που εκπαιδεύει τα μυαλά που τελικά παράγουν τη γνώση και εργάζονται πάνω σε αυτή, και οι επιχειρήσεις που μετατρέπουν τη γνώση σε προϊόντα και υπηρεσίες που προσθέτουν αξία και πλούτο στην οικονομία. Υπάρχουν επιπλέον και ένα σωρό άλλα συστατικά που συνδέουν αυτά τα τρία μεταξύ τους, από incubators, διάφορες πηγές χρηματοδότησης, μέχρι το ρυθμιστικό πλαίσιο και το πολιτικό σύστημα μιας χώρας. Τώρα, όλο αυτό το σύστημα, στη δική μας χώρα, το σύστημα καινοτομίας της δεν λειτουργεί πολύ καλά. Και για λόγους που οι ερευνητές εξηγούν εξαντλητικά μες στη μελέτη. Εδώ θα δούμε συνοπτικά μερικά από τα βασικά συστατικά αυτού του συστήματος καινοτομίας για να καταλάβουμε το πού υπάρχει πρόβλημα. Πρώτα απ' όλα, τη χρηματοδότηση. Τα λεφτά που επενδύονται για να δημιουργηθεί καινούργια γνώση και καινοτομία στη χώρα είναι λίγα. Συνολικά η χώρα μας επενδύει το 1,27% του ΑΕΠ σε δαπάνες για R&D. Είναι περίπου 2,3 δισεκατομμύρια το 2019, ποσό αρκετά χαμηλότερο από το μέσο όρο της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης που είναι περίπου 2,14 του ΑΕΠ. Υπάρχουν δε χώρες με μέγεθος παρόμοιο της Ελλάδας, όπως η Αυστρία ή το Βέλγιο, που επενδύουν σχεδόν τα πενταπλάσια. Αξίζει επίσης να θυμόμαστε βέβαια ότι επενδύσεις σε R&D κάνει και το κράτος, κάνουν και οι επιχειρήσεις. Και στην Ελλάδα το κράτος που διαχρονικά υστερούσε, σιγά σιγά φαίνεται να φτάνει τον ευρωπαϊκό μέσο όρο. Το κράτος το ελληνικό δίνει περίπου 1 δισεκατομμύριο το χρόνο, που είναι 0,7 του ΑΕΠ και που είναι περίπου ο ευρωπαϊκός μέσος όρος. Η μεγάλη διαφορά είναι στις ιδιωτικές επενδύσεις σε R&D. Εδώ ο ελληνικός ιδιωτικός τομέας επενδύει σχεδόν 3 φορές λιγότερα από ότι ο ευρωπαϊκός μέσος όρος. Θα μιλήσουμε παρακάτω για το γιατί συμβαίνει αυτό. Πριν όμως πάμε στις επιχειρήσεις, αξίζει να πούμε 2 λόγια για το τι συμβαίνει με τα 2 άλλα κρίσιμα συστατικά του συστήματος καινοτομίας, τα ερευνητικά κέντρα και τα πανεπιστήμια και το ανθρώπινο δυναμικό. Στην Ελλάδα παράγεται γνώση. Αναφέρθηκε και στα χτεσινά πάνελ. Οι Έλληνες ερευνητές παράγουν πολλές και υψηλού επίπεδου επιστημονικές δημοσιεύσεις. Από τότε που δημιουργήθηκαν τα άκρως ανταγωνιστικά ευρωπαϊκά προγράμματα για τη χρηματοδότηση της έρευνας, 36 χρόνια πριν, οι ελληνικοί οργανισμοί είναι σταθερά στην πρώτη δεκάδα ανάμεσα σε αυτούς που τα διεκδικούν και τα κερδίζουν. Υπάρχουν, φανταστείτε, 77.000 ευρωπαϊκοί οργανισμοί ερευνητικοί που διεκδικούν τα προγράμματα Horizon 2020. Από αυτούς, από τους 100 πρώτους, οι 7 είναι ελληνικοί. Το Εθνικό Μετσόβιο Πολυτεχνείο είναι στην 7η θέση, ενώ το Imperial, για να φανταστείτε, είναι στην 9η και το Πολυτεχνείο του Μιλάνου στη 15η. Βεβαίως υπάρχει ένας άλλος λόγος για τον οποίο τα ελληνικά ιδρύματα τα πηγαίνουν πολύ καλά στα προγράμματα Horizon, και αυτός είναι το ότι έχουν λιγότερες εναλλακτικές επιλογές για χρηματοδότηση σε σχέση με οργανισμούς άλλων πιο ανεπτυγμένων χωρών. Οπότε αναγκάζονται να δώσουν μεγάλη έμφαση σε αυτές τις πηγές. Και έτσι τα πηγαίνουν καλά, και σήμερα πάνω από το 10% των δαπανών για έρευνα στη χώρα μας προέρχεται από τέτοια προγράμματα. Αλλά οπωσδήποτε φταίει και το ότι γίνεται υψηλού επίπεδου έρευνα σε πολλά ελληνικά ερευνητικά ιδρύματα. Είναι ωστόσο γνωστό ταυτόχρονα το ότι αυτή η έρευνα σπάνια οδηγεί σε προϊόντα και υπηρεσίες. Οι Έλληνες επιστήμονες παράγουν πολλά papers, αλλά λίγες πατέντες. Στην Ελλάδα κατατίθεται περίπου 10 φορές λιγότερες αιτήσεις για διπλώματα ευρεσιτεχνίας κατά κεφαλήν από ό,τι στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Ο κυριότερος λόγος δεν είναι τόσο ότι οι δαπάνες των ελληνικών επιχειρήσεων για R&D οδηγούν σε λιγότερες πατέντες, αλλά κυρίως το ότι οι ελληνικές επιχειρήσεις που ενδιαφέρονται για την κατοχύρωση ευρεσιτεχνιών είναι ελάχιστες. Πριν πάμε στις επιχειρήσεις, επιπλέον, για να περάσουμε και στο θέμα του ανθρώπινου δυναμικού. Στην Ελλάδα απασχολούνται σχετικά λίγοι άνθρωποι με έρευνα και ανάπτυξη και στον ιδιωτικό και στο δημόσιο τομέα. Υπολογίζονται συνολικά περίπου σε 55.000. Στις άλλες συγκρίσιμες χώρες που αναφέραμε, το Βέλγιο και την Αυστρία, είναι περίπου διπλάσιοι. Και γι' αυτό δεν φταίει ότι δεν έχουμε αποφύτους, ότι το εκπαιδευτικό μας σύστημα δεν βγάζει αρκετούς καταρτισμένους εργαζόμενους. Βγάζουμε πολλούς. Αλλά από ό,τι φαίνεται, δεν είναι καταρτισμένοι και εκπαιδευμένοι σε τομείς και σε skills που χρειάζεται η αγορά. Το 43% των Ελλήνων αποφύτων πανεπιστημίων απασχολείται σε θέσεις εργασίας που δεν χρειάζονται πτυχίο πανεπιστημίου. Ταυτόχρονα, το 36% των επιχειρήσεων δεν βρίσκουν ανθρώπους με τα κατάλληλα skills για να συμπληρώσουν τις θέσεις εργασίας που έχουν. Και οι μισές επιχειρήσεις λένε ότι οι υπάλληλοι τους δεν έχουν τα κατάλληλα skills. Παρ' όλα αυτά, μόνο 1 στις 5 ελληνικές επιχειρήσεις έχουν έστω και κάποια υποτυπώδη προγράμματα κατάρτισης για τους εργαζομένους. Ενώ στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση είναι 3 στις 4. Μόνο 1 στις 4 ελληνικές επιχειρήσεις έχει έστω και υποτυπώδες τμήμα R&D. Το 60% των μεγάλων επιχειρήσεων με πάνω από 250 υπαλλήλους δεν έχουν τμήμα R&D. Οπότε, έχουμε πρόβλημα στη σύνδεση της έρευνας στα πανεπιστήμια και τα ερευνητικά ιδρύματα με τις επιχειρήσεις και την αγορά. Στο Global Innovation Index, το δείκτη συνεργασίας ανάμεσα σε επιχειρήσεις και πανεπιστήμια, η χώρα μας καταλαμβάνει την 119η θέση ανάμεσα σε 131 χώρες. Έχουμε πρόβλημα με το ανθρώπινο δυναμικό και τη σύνδεση αυτού με τις ανάγκες της αγοράς. Αλλά υπάρχει και ένα άλλο σημαντικό πρόβλημα, και αυτό θα είναι το τελευταίο που θα σας πω, το προανήγγειλα, το γενικότερο πρόβλημα της επιχειρηματικότητας στην Ελλάδα. Στη χώρα μας ιδρύονται ακόμα περισσότερες επιχειρήσεις από όσες κλείνουν. Μόνο το 2020, το έτος της κρίσης και της πανδημίας, συστάθηκαν 23.000 περισσότερες επιχειρήσεις από όσες έκλεισαν. Ωστόσο, αυτή η νέα επιχειρηματικότητα είναι σε μεγάλο βαθμό, όπως το γράφουν οι ερευνητές μέσα, επιχειρηματικότητα ανάγκης και όχι ευκαιρίας. Οι Έλληνες επιχειρηματίες ανοίγουν επιχειρήσεις κυρίως επειδή δεν έχουν άλλη επιλογή, όχι επειδή θέλουν να αξιοποιήσουν μια επιχειρηματική ιδέα για να αυξήσουν το εισόδημά τους. Γι' αυτό ένα μεγάλο μέρος των ελληνικών επιχειρήσεων εστιάζονται σε μη παραγωγικούς εσωστρεφείς τομείς όπως η εστίαση ή το λιανεμπόριο. Επιπλέον, οι περισσότερες νέες επιχειρήσεις που ανοίγουν είναι πολύ πολύ μικρές. Από αυτές τις 23.000 καινούριες επιχειρήσεις που είπαμε ότι άνοιξαν το 2020, το 43% ήταν ατομικές. Στην Ελλάδα το 97,4% των επιχειρήσεων είναι πολύ μικρού μεγέθους, με λιγότερους από 9 υπαλλήλους. Και αυτές απασχολούν σχεδόν τα 2 τρίτα του ανθρώπινου δυναμικού. Στην υπόλοιπη Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση υπάρχουν επίσης μια πλειοψηφία από πολύ μικρές επιχειρήσεις, αλλά εκείνες απασχολούν το 29% του ανθρώπινου δυναμικού κατά μέσο όρο. Υπάρχουν και άλλα θέματα βεβαίως και βαθύτερα θέματα όπως η επιχειρηματική κουλτούρα, η φοβία απέναντι στο ρίσκο, η φοβία για την αποτυχία. Είναι πολλά πράγματα. Δεν προλαβαίνουμε να τα αναλύσουμε όλα σήμερα εδώ. Αλλά όλη αυτή η χαρτογράφηση μπορείτε να τη δείτε στην πλήρη έρευνα που υπάρχει στο διανέωσης.org και μαζί μπορείτε να δείτε και τις λύσεις που προτείνουν οι ερευνητές. Στη χώρα μας αξίζει να πούμε ότι τα τελευταία χρόνια έχουν γίνει κάποιες κινήσεις προς τη σωστή κατεύθυνση. Αλλά ακόμα απομένουν πάρα πολλά που θα πρέπει να γίνουν. Οι λύσεις που προτείνονται στη μελέτη είναι πολλά μικρά και μεγάλα τεχνικά θέματα που έχουν να κάνουν με κίνητρα για επενδύσεις R&D στις επιχειρήσεις, με μεγαλύτερες δημόσιες δαπάνες για την έρευνα και βεβαίως με τομές και παρεμβάσεις στην εκπαίδευση και την κατάρτιση. Βλέπετε μερικές εδώ, δεν θα τις απαριθμίσουμε, να πούμε μόνο ένα παράδειγμα, οι δημόσιες προμήθειες. Οι δημόσιες προμήθειες θα μπορούσαν να είναι ένα καλό όχημα για να αναγκάσουν τις εταιρείες που λειτουργούν ως προμηθευτές του δημοσίου να αναπτύξουν δικές τους καινοτόμες επιχειρήσεις και λύσεις. Είναι κάτι που έχει γίνει με αποτελεσματικό τρόπο στο παρελθόν στον κατασκευαστικό κλάδο και σε άλλους κλάδους. Θα μπορούσε να γίνει σε ακόμα περισσότερους δυναμικούς και σημαντικούς κλάδους, όπως ας πούμε για παράδειγμα η άμυνα που ακούστηκε σε ένα από τα χτεσινά πάνελ. Επιπλέον, άλλο παράδειγμα, στα πανεπιστήμια πρέπει να οργανωθούν γραφεία μεταφοράς τεχνολογίας. Μόνο το Αριστοτέλειο έχει μέχρι τώρα και πρέπει να αποκτήσουν και τα άλλα για τη σύνδεση των ερευνητών τους με επιχειρήσεις και με τη βιομηχανία. Τα δεδομένα του δημοσίου ξέρουμε ότι πρέπει να ανοίξουν και το ταχύτερο δυνατό. Επίσης, ευρωπαϊκά προγράμματα για τη στήριξη της επιχειρηματικότητας πρέπει να επεκταθούν. Περισσότερα πιο τολμηρά φορολογικά κίνητρα για τις επιχειρήσεις που θέλουν να επενδύσουν σε R&D πρέπει να δοθούν. Μια αρχή σε αυτό το κομμάτι έχει γίνει. Το 2020 το ποσοστό επενδύσεων σε R&D που απαλλάσσεται από τη φορολογία αυξήθηκε για τις ελληνικές επιχειρήσεις από 30% σε 100%. Αλλά χρειάζονται και άλλες τέτοιες πρωτοβουλίες. Είναι δεκάδες επιμέρους προτάσεις που περιλαμβάνονται στη μελέτη, αλλά πρέπει να θυμόμαστε ότι ίσως σημαντικότερες παρεμβάσεις είναι σε θέματα γενικότερα. Είναι παρεμβάσεις σε θέματα που αφορούν συνολικότερα την προβληματική κατάσταση της ελληνικής επιχειρηματικότητας. Έχουν να κάνουν με την σταθεροποίηση του φορολογικού συστήματος, για παράδειγμα, τη μείωση της πολυνομίας και της γραφειοκρατίας, τη δημόσια διοίκηση, αλλά και τη ριζική αναβάθμιση της εκπαιδευτικής διαδικασίας σε όλες τις βαθμίδες. Το Εθνικό Συμβούλιο Έρευνας, Τεχνολογίας και Καινοτομίας που έχει φτιαχτεί, το ΕΣΕΤΕΚ, έχει θέσει ως κεντρικό στόχο του τον σχεδιασμό ενός συνεχούς και διαδραστικού οικοσυστήματος από την έρευνα μέχρι την καινοτομία και την επιχειρηματικότητα. Είναι ένας δύσκολος στόχος αυτός, φιλόδοξος, μα απαραίτητος για να υλοποιηθούν και όλα τα υπόλοιπα που θα ακούσουμε σήμερα εδώ. Αν θέλουμε να το πετύχουμε, αυτή η μελέτη της διανέωσης αποτελεί μια καλή αρχή. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
I've had the opportunity to actually read the report that Thodoris was talking about, and I really encourage everyone to do the same. It's a very, very interesting report with very, very important findings. Now, we have a message from our Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Kostas Fragogiannis, and everyone should bear in mind that in order to activate all these Greeks around the world, but also serve a lot of Greeks that are building businesses around the world, the role of embassies and consulates is of paramount importance. Hence, this message is particularly relevant.
Καλημέρα. Θα ήθελα να εκφράσω καταρχάς τις ευχές μου για κάθε επιτυχία στο Innovative Greeks, στην πρωτοβουλία που έχει πάρει ο ΣΕΒ με το Endeavor Greece και που αναφέρεται στην κοινότητα των Ελλήνων της καινοτομίας. Στο Υπουργείο Εξωτερικών η καινοτομία είναι σε πολύ υψηλή βαθμίδα σε όλα όσα σκεφτόμαστε, σε όσα φιλοδοξούμε και σε όσα κάνουμε. Το project Smart and Sustainable Island της Αστυπάλαιας είναι ένα παράδειγμα του πώς μπορούμε να βάλουμε την καινοτομία, την πρωτοπορία, την τεχνολογία σε υψηλή βαθμίδα και να δημιουργήσουμε κάτι το οποίο αφήνει ένα πραγματικό αποτύπωμα μιας εικόνας του μέλλοντος στη σημερινή εποχή. Μία άλλη πρωτοβουλία για την οποία θα ήθελα να σας μιλήσω μισό λεπτό είναι αυτή που αναφέρεται στην επιστημονική διπλωματία. Στο νέο σχέδιο νόμου που ψηφίζεται αυτές τις μέρες στην Βουλή των Ελλήνων υπάρχει συγκεκριμένο άρθρο το οποίο εισάγει για πρώτη φορά στην ιστορία μας την έννοια του επιστημονικού διπλωμάτη. Είναι η δυνατότητα του να μπορούμε να φέρουμε κοντά τις ακαδημαϊκές και τις επαγγελματικές κοινότητες ανάμεσα σε δύο χώρες, ανάμεσα στις δύο πλευρές του Ατλαντικού, αν αναφερθώ στη Βοστόνη, όπου θα εφαρμόσουμε για πρώτη φορά σε πιλωτικό επίπεδο την έννοια του επιστημονικού διπλωμάτη. Πρέπει οι ακαδημαϊκές κοινότητες των Ελλήνων του κόσμου και γενικότερα των πανεπιστημίων στα οποία οι Έλληνες δραστηριοποιούνται να έρθουν σε επαφή με τους συναδέλφους τους στην Ελλάδα, να έρθουν σε επαφή με τις επαγγελματικές κοινότητες στην Ελλάδα και στην Αμερική, οπουδήποτε και αν είναι αυτές, προκειμένου να αναδείξουν την καινοτομία και να την αναγάγουν στο επίπεδο που της αξίζει. Κάθε επιτυχία στο συνέδριο, κάθε επιτυχία σε όλα όσα έχετε να πείτε και εύχομαι η καινοτομία να θριαμβεύσει στο τέλος σε κάθε ενέργεια την οποία κάνουμε και κάθε σκέψη η οποία αφορά τα όνειρά μας και τις φιλοδοξίες μας για τη χώρα μας. Καλημέρα και πάλι.
I am delighted to coordinate a discussion today between two young, actually still in their 30s, but very accomplished guys. Michael Kratsios was the 4th Chief Technology Officer of the United States. And obviously, it's a great privilege to be able to pick his brains and discuss with him where Greece can go next. And with Michael, we also have Kiriakos Pierrakis, the Minister of Digital Governance. I was delighted when I found out that he would be minister in that position. I've known him for years. And this kind of fresh thinking and can-do attitude is what has transformed, actually, the country in a very short space of time in the right direction, the latest being the whole management of a very complex project of vaccinating the Greek population. I have to say personally, having taken my father last week to be vaccinated, I'll just quote my father who said, "I think I'm in Sweden." So, guys, it's great to have you both. And I'll start with a question that I think start-uppers, younger folks in the technology space, obviously have a short memory, they're quite young, but they have this impression that government or the state and technology and entrepreneurship and innovation don't really mix. Now, I keep telling them, obviously, that places like Silicon Valley or places like, Israel, or even the Nordics, these ecosystems were largely born out of precisely this kind of collaboration between the government or the state and private enterprise and young people, researchers, etc. So my first question, and I'll start with Michael, who's seen this happen successfully in the States, is how do these two mix most successfully? How do you get the balance between not being too government sort of focused or too public service slow, let's call it, and the speed and energy of the private sector?
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and join such an incredible event. So congratulations on putting this together. To your question, I think the answer that I always give and I always like to talk about is the power of what I like to call the innovation ecosystem. It's something that has to be sort of one part private sector, one part academia, and one part government. And there's no way that an innovation ecosystem can succeed without each part of the ecosystem pulling together and adding its value to the system. And I think what the United States has successfully been able to do over the past 50 years or even longer has been to really leverage the strengths of each of those pillars of the innovation system to drive technological discovery and leadership. So, for example, the federal government can be really good at investing in early stage, pre-competitive, basic research and development that industry is often not incentivized to do because the commercial sort of benefits won't be seen for many years to come. On the other side, later stage sort of commercialized products are not ones that the federal government or taxpayers should be funding, but the private sector is very incentivized to do. And kind of in the middle, the gel and kind of glue that holds that together is the academic community, which is able to actually do the research and continue to drive innovation forward. So, when you think about where the greatest sort of discoveries come out of the United States, you think of things like DARPA, for example. I know you had Dr. Coleman on earlier. They were the ones who created sort of the internet and took the risk to sort of develop that technology, and then the commercial sector was able to kind of leverage that to drive everything that we have today in the digital economy. So for me, I think when I think about how nations can sort of leverage the full power and breadth of their innovation community, it's to really play to your strengths. Make sure that what you are doing as a federal government or as a government entity, as a private sector entity, as an academic, is to your strength, and the greater bonds and links that you can build between each of these different pillars is what ultimately can drive long-term innovation and discovery.
Indeed, Victoria yesterday did mention that Greece, which I didn't know, by the way, that it's the second highest spender after the United States per capita in defense after the United States. And, she put on the table this, especially dual-use technology, things that begin from the military or defense, but then have a positive impact on the rest of the ecosystem. Kiriakos, what areas do you think we could be focusing on? You're doing an amazing job bringing us to the 21st century in Greece, and you've done leaps and bounds in that direction. Looking to the future, are there certain areas that you have in mind that we can gain some competitive advantage?
Marco, let me begin by expressing warm thanks for the invitation and congratulations for this event. It's a joy to speak with you and Michael Kratsios. And let me start off by saying that I fully adhere to Michael's point. The state sets the stage. You need to play to your strengths. It unleashes potential. It can generate value. And let me use as a very quick example what we did with the deployment of 5G networks in Greece, which in my view showcases how optimally one can design footsteps on behalf of the state for the deployment of a specific sector. So it was a tiered approach. On the one hand, we designed a business-friendly auction, which had all 4 bands together. It had a timeline of 6 years vis-a-vis the deployment of the networks. We had the development of a specialized venture capital fund ingrained within the spectrum auction. In a sense, we instrumentalized the auction to generate a market. and we reserved a portion of the spectrum, which we're providing for free to research centers, universities, and startups to develop products. Now, I'm using this as an example, Marco, as a burning platform to say that, in a sense, what we need to do, instead of, let's say, picking sectors, I think that it's people like you that should pick the sectors. I think it's the entrepreneurs, it's the venture capital managers, rather than the policymakers. The policymakers, I think, should remove barriers, regulate properly, defining the proper, let's say, incentive mechanisms for entrepreneurs to unleash this potential. And effectively, I think that what we did with 5G showcases how we should, let's say, leverage the full strength of the state. As you mentioned in your original question, many startuppers don't have in mind that states have played a significant role in the development of ecosystems. This was the case in the United States. I think that in Greece, both of us know well that the Jeremy funds and the Equi fund played a very significant role in the development of our domestic ecosystem, very much inspired by what Israel did with Yozma. So I think that, in a sense, we should do what Michael said. Let's play to our strengths and focus on the strengths that we have to fully unleash our potential.
The only thing I would say, Kiriakos, and this is like a sort of a question for both of you, is being a venture capitalist now, as Michael said, you know, I have to deliver returns to my investors. And I can see sort of glimmers of excellence in places that I can't justifiably invest in yet, because it's too early, right? And you know, this does include some part of life science, like the more cutting-edge biotech stuff. It may include some stuff around defense, in which case, actually, the government is quite instrumental. I mean, would you imagine a situation where you have the equivalent of a 5G fund? Victoria said some countries have put together defense-specific funds to fund very early stage research in that area that is not yet, let's call it, commercially viable. Do you think that is something that might be interesting, Michael, for Greece?
I think so, and I think as Kiriakos mentioned, they put together kind of a very interesting model where, at least in Greece, you're able to sort of take proceeds from an auction and put them in a fund that's managed by sort of professional investors to provide opportunities for people who are building products in that space. I think if you move a little bit earlier on the sort of development scale, and you're looking at something that's far more pre-competitive, you're trying to figure out what is the sort of 6G or 7G type of telecommunications technology. I think there you probably need to use a slightly different model and kind of think about it through a lens of kind of your basic research pool. But I think the general idea of the way that sort of Kiriakos has kind of discussed their 5G fund, I think kind of hits on kind of what you're talking about.
All right, Kiriakos.
Michael, if I were to answer this, if we focus on defense, to provide an analogy, I think that the idea with focusing on defense is actually brilliant. But what we have in mind, together with Nikos Panagotopoulos, the Minister of Defense, is, for instance, to take the mandatory army service that we have in Greece and effectively inject digital skills, perhaps during this 1 year. So, in a sense, leveraging the resources that we have as a state and focusing on what we already do in order to optimize it in that sense, I think is the way to go forward.
I think you're absolutely right. I'll give you a personal example. When we were hiring for Persado, experts in terms of creating algorithms that can generate language automatically, some of our best people were actually from Israel, and they had really kicked off their careers pretty much in the army while serving. Why? Because obviously surveillance was very important, and they acquired skills around algorithms that recognize imaging at huge volumes and recognizing threats. What can be a threatening image out of, countless masses of video. So I'm totally with you on that. I think that's definitely the case. But Kiriakos, I was wondering this past year, and I'm sort of wanted to get your take on this. A lot of journalists sort of will ask people in our field, are Greeks ready? We're way behind. People are like the digital kind of metrics of Greece are way behind. Having said that, my experience is that COVID kind of force-fed an entire population to go digital. And in the end, I saw, even people like my dad, who's the worst kind of example of a non-digital person, have to adapt. What has been your sense in the past year or during this pandemic? How fast have Greeks adjusted to this new reality?
Exactly as you're implying, extremely fast. And in a sense, I think that we have managed to significantly leapfrog our position on certain fronts. I mean, we have discussed this with Michael extensively, also in his previous capacity, that, for instance, even, Greece hadn't conducted its 5G auction when Michael and I first met. And we managed to bundle all four bands of spectrum in a single auction, while other countries haven't managed to complete this. And we completed it in 2020. We have a government portal. We have a government app. Our vaccination platform, as you mentioned, it's already being covered in the international press as a success. And in many places, many countries haven't managed to deploy such a platform properly, or such a system, because it's not only about digital systems, right? It's about service design, with digital being the core element, but you also need to fully design the physical services in parallel with the digital services. It's about process simplification and design. So I would say that my feeling is that on certain fronts, we still have room to cover, right? We still need to deploy digital systems. Even digitizing our files, Marco, I would say, in the Greek state is still a necessity in the cadastre or in the justice system or in the hospitals to create patient records. So on certain fronts, we still have outstanding work with third industrial revolution elements, but we're moving forward very quickly, and we will take advantage of EU funds in order to fully complete this leapfrog effect. But on the other hand, I would say that given the examples that I mentioned and our overall performance in pandemic management using technological tools, and now with vaccination or with 5G, we have showcased that actually leapfrogging is possible, and that the country, if I were to make an analogy from the ICT sector, the country has had the hardware, I would say, for quite a long time, but has lacked the software, the proper rules of the game, the policies, lawmaking, regulation, all those types of measures and initiatives that provide us with the capability to fully unleash this potential. So I believe that right now this is fully feasible.
Great. I mean, Michael, a lot of people asked me in advance of this panel, what does the CTO of the United States of America actually do, and what can he do? I mean, you have so many federal units, you have, the states. It's a very complicated picture. It'd be great if you could share with us, what it is that you did mostly as a job description and then as a job experience in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And the role of the technology office at the White House is to coordinate federal technology policy across government. So the U.S. has a large number of agencies, whether it's Health and Human Services, or Department of Defense, or Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, and each of them have some level of involvement in technology policy. And kind of our role was to kind of bring all those agencies together to define a national strategic vision, and then to work with the agencies to implement that, whether it's through, removing barriers to innovation through changes in regulatory domains, whether it's helping coordinate research and development spending across the various agencies, whether it's sort of coordinating on sort of technical training or external education programs across the various agencies that do that. So it really is sort of bringing the government together on a common vision forward. And for example, some of the things relating to COVID is, what we recognize as an office that, there were regulatory barriers in the United States for allowing telemedicine to actually succeed during the pandemic. There were rules in place that didn't allow certain doctors to be reimbursed for telemedicine services. So one of our big efforts was to figure out how can we very quickly change the regulatory language to allow these reimbursements to happen, and then unlock all these doctors who can suddenly be able to kind of treat patients. And that's an example where kind of the White House made a decision to move forward, and then worked with an individual agency that was relevant in this space to make that happen.
Okay, I mean, one of the dreams, right, in terms of digital governance in many people's minds is a situation a bit like Estonia, where essentially the government creates a digital interface which almost has like APIs, And literally, either citizens or businesses can plug into these APIs and really gain even competitive advantage internationally because of that. Is the United States, before we go into Kiriakos on how we can do this here, is the United States anywhere close to something like this?
No, honestly, I don't think the U.S. vision maybe maps directly to that. I think primarily because of our model of having 50 states who have their own systems and responsibilities. You have a federal government that has its own responsibilities, and there's creating a sort of national sort of database or registry of American citizens at the federal level is probably something that will never be palatable in the U.S. But what we can do is provide as seamless as possible services to citizens who want to engage with the federal government in the areas where they need federal services. So if you are applying for a passport, if you are trying to get access to a national park, or whatever it may be, these are all examples of services that Americans sort of have touch points with the federal government. And what's most key is to make those as seamless as possible. And it extends to even sort of more thorny issues like filing your taxes, which people often get frustrated with. So it's being able to kind of figure out what the pain points are of the most common touch points with the federal government and make those seamless, rather than sort of thinking about it as a one unit place where everyone's data is as a repository.
Kiriakos, what's your take on this? I can tell you this is the dream, especially when it comes to things like open data. Our perspective is you've got companies like Facebook, obviously monetizing consumer data very successfully. Perhaps, if the government goes in the direction of offering that kind of service to businesses, maybe interesting things can happen. What's your take on this?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? Is what you said vis-a-vis Estonia. How does one become Estonia? Estonia for us is a compass. It's not a map. Estonia had its own institutional path after the collapse of the Soviet Union. You can do everything digitally there, apart from a couple of things like getting married, getting divorced, or buying a house. So eventually, this is the end result, but the path to go there is very eclectic. It's we've said it many times, reforms are a little bit like transplants. When you're studying other states, you need to have donor-receiver compatibility. So what we did was much prior to the election. Actually, the interest was of the Prime Minister himself, the leader of the opposition. We studied what everyone else does. We tried to see what's relevant in our context. So we looked at gov.uk from the UK, so we interpreted it in our context with gov.gr, and now it's quite unique. It's quite different from gov.uk. We studied the Estonian identity system. We studied policies from the government of the United States. And eventually, if I were to quote, there are many quotes about plans which go wrong in the process. Eventually, you need to be very agile. Eventually, the pandemic came. And there, from the concept of a strategic ministry, this became an operational ministry. And we had to be very much involved in pretty much everything. Thus, the whole idea here is that you build a team, you have a solid plan, and if the financial capabilities are there, which they are, you need to implement this plan both short-term and medium-term as quickly as possible in order to leapfrog. So far, we have managed to deliver upon this. I believe that if we leverage the financial capabilities that we have in our hands with all the EU tools that are currently available, by implementing the Digital Bible, which we have published, which has more than 400 different projects for the next 4 years, we will be able to fully claim that this leapfrogging effect has actually taken place.
That's excellent. Unfortunately, we have to close here. I wish I could talk to you for hours because it's a very interesting discussion. But what I take from this discussion, as regards Greece at least, is that there are people like Michael and many more in the States like Victoria that can certainly give us wholehearted support and advice. And if it's true, which I believe it is, where there's a will, there's a way. I do think that the will exists, especially by you personally, Kiriakos, and your ministry. So I'm sure we're going to find a way and get it done, and maybe even leapfrog other countries, because sometimes laggards can indeed have this advantage. So good luck to your work and keep it up. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My favorite quote was actually my father's favorite quote, and I've loved it my whole life. It's by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's called, "What is Success? To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate the beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life is breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded."
My favorite motto in life is nothing ventured, nothing gained.
My favorite quote was written by Bertrand Russell in 1933, and it says that the fundamental cause of all trouble in the modern world is that the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt.
My favorite quote was actually my father's favorite quote, and I've loved it my whole life. It's by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's called, "What is Success? To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate the beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child."
Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Andreas Davropoulos. I am a board member of Endeavor Greece, but I'm also a long-term, I've been a venture investor now for over 20 years.
Quote
based in
was
Silicon
actually
Valley.
my father's favorite quote, and I've loved it my...
And I believe we're still having a quote playing, which is a great quote. These are the words of Scott Friend, one of our auspicious panelists.
I didn't realize what a starring role I was going to have today.
Hopefully we're back on. Let's just keep going. So I was saying I'm Andreas Davropoulos. I've been a venture investor for 20 years, but I'm not the important person here. I'm just to moderate a great discussion. I'm joined by a number of foreign investors who have actually invested in Greece, unlike me, who've only done a couple of personal investments, such as trip around. Though I do try to back Greek founders around the world as much as I can find them, companies like Balena, Number AI in the US. But today, let's first go through a quick round of introductions. We're going to go alphabetical, starting with Laurel Bogan. Laurel, go ahead. She's a partner at 83 North.
Hi, everyone. I'm one of four partners, actually, in a firm called 83 North. We're investing our fifth fund and have about 1.3 billion under management, and invest in European and Israeli entrepreneurs across really all stages of consumer and enterprise companies. And we've been early stage investors and board members of companies like iZettle, Just Eat, Celonis, Marqeta, and Walt, just to name a few.
Thank you, Laurel. James Christopoulos is a senior managing director with CVC. James.
Kalmera, or Kalispera, I guess, from New York. My quick background, I was born and raised in Athens, but I think like many of the other panelists today, I moved to the US for university and I've stayed here ever since. So I've been in New York for almost 22 years now. So I think I've picked up the accent and sound pretty American. Fairly traditional finance career. I've been working in private equity for almost 18 years now. Been at CVC for the last 7 years. CVC is a global private equity firm. We invest really throughout Europe, Asia, and the Americas. And at CVC, I have two roles, really. I lead our investments here in the US in the services and industrials areas, but I also help co-lead our investments in Greece with my colleague and good friend, Alex Fedakidis, who is now moved permanently to Athens. So I've had the great pleasure to have worked on several investments with CVC in Greece the last few years. So very honored and happy to be part of the panel.
Great to have you here, James. Scott Friend is a partner with Bain Capital Ventures and had this fantastic quote we heard a couple times.
Yeah, I thought I would just read the quote again now. I really appreciate that. Sorry about that. It is a good quote, though. I'm a partner at Bain Capital Ventures, the venture arm of Bain Capital. We're on our 9th fund with around $6 billion under management. We invest across the venture landscape, predominantly enterprise, but also consumer. And I've been here 15 years, focused entirely on early stage venture, mostly B2B. The prior chapter of my career, I was a founder of a big data and analytics company before those terms were as in vogue as they are today. And we sold that business to Oracle in 2005. I joined Bain Capital shortly thereafter. Very, very excited to be here today.
Great to have you, Scott. Nikitas Koutoupes, who's a partner with Insight Partners and has made what I think is probably one of the largest growth capital investment in Greece for venture capitalists. We'll talk about it later. Nikita.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation. I'm Nikitas Koutoupes. I was born and raised in Piraeus. I also came to school in the United States when I was 18. That was a long, long time ago. My mother has stopped waiting by this point. I started my career at McKinsey & Company. Then I started a technology business in the late 90s out of business school. So I can tell entrepreneurs exactly what not to do from that experience. In the spring of 2001, I joined Insights. And so I'm celebrating my 20th year in a couple of months. Insight is a global technology investor, software, data, and software-enabled services. We bought about 30-some billion under management, about 240 companies in the portfolio, about 400 companies since inception, over 20 billion in realizations to date, including 45 IPOs. And hoping that our investment in Epignosis will kind of blossom into more of a presence in the Greek ecosystem.
I should mention that as part of DFJ, which now we've rebranded Threshold Ventures, we've also invested in companies like Tesla, SpaceX, Baidu in China, Skype in Europe from the very early stages. So I think you've all realized that by now we have some important investors over here. But I'd say maybe even more importantly, we're also, it's a great pleasure to be joined by the Chief Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister of Greece, Mr. Alex Patelis. Alex.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Alex Patelis. I'm the Chief Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister of Greece, Kiriakos. This is my first job in government and my first job with Greeks, as I like to say. My background is entirely in economics. I have a PhD in economics and then worked as an analyst and as an economist, as a strategist in Wall Street and also in the City of London for a number of years. And I ran my own research shop. I'm delighted to have joined the government. This is a reformist government that is working on changing Greece, and very excited to be part of this panel. Thanks.
Great to have you, Alex. In fact, we're going to start with the first question to you. I'd like to start from like a macro level, and then we can make it more micro in terms of advice to particular entrepreneurs and all of that. But from a macro level, I mean, we know that there's a number of efforts such as, regeneration in Greece that trains a lot of people to join startups and other large companies. So there's a lot of private and nonprofit efforts, but obviously the scale and scope of the government is unmatched. Can you briefly outline what you think are the most important new government initiatives to attract foreign investors, such as the group here, into the Greek ecosystem?
Thanks so much, Andreas, for the question. It's a very difficult one to answer in a short period of time. I will highlight two areas. Obviously, this government very much believes in digital reform. We were preceded by Minister Pierrakis. The Ministry for Digital Reform did not exist, was created by this government and is implementing the so-called Digital Bible. Lots of projects here. I would also highlight Greece now has 5G operational in a number of major cities, and also the innovative Christos Fund, which used part of the proceeds from the auction to invest in 5G services. So for those of you interested in that, you can check it out. But there's also a lot of changes in taxation. We've lowered we have now a 24% corporate income tax rate, 5% dividend tax rate. super depreciation for CapEx in R&D, super depreciation for CapEx in digital as well. We have special incentives for angel investors. And I would also highlight most recently, we passed a law that means that if you relocate your job from abroad to Greece or you create a new job, then you will receive half your income tax-free. That's half your income tax-free for up to 7 years. So digital and taxes main focuses, but of course, reforms in general. I would highlight the insolvency reform bill that was passed a while ago. It basically incentivizes entrepreneurship, allows corporate failure, and the government has passed over 160 bills through Parliament. And I'm going to end my comments with probably the most important change of all, which is political and institutional stability. The country went through a long crisis. It has emerged stronger. It shook off populism, and it's now a confident country with a government, a single-party government with a stable majority in Parliament of the types you no longer see in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Laurel, turning to you. Now, you and 83 North, you guys have invested in multiple geographies around the world, including Greece. You've got companies like Lenses and Workable in Greece. What are some of the common elements that you look for, that you'd like to see in companies, regardless of where they're located?
So, you probably want me to say that we're focused on, certain sectors, and we do tons of analysis and come to all these very smart conclusions on markets, and then pick the winners. But, unfortunately, none of this is true. And I probably would have not said that 15 years ago. But when we look back at the investments we've made over the last 15 or so years, we realize we just don't do masses of analysis, and we don't even try and meet hundreds of companies. Of course, we've come to know a few sectors quite well, but mostly because we've had the fortune to work, I think, with fantastic founders. But looking back, I try to think, you asked me this question, I thought, okay, what do we focus on? I think firstly, it's exceptional founders. I think if you met the founders in our company, they're truly exceptional people. I think the founders often have a very, very big focus on product. They're in markets that we all understand and like. I think the worst thing would be to be sitting in a company where you don't really like the market and the product. And then they're markets that are big enough. And when I say big enough, it's, they don't all have to be huge. If you're a company with in a very sort of uncompetitive market, you don't need the market to be that big. And then finally, we invest for 5 to 15 years. And I'm really saying this range on purpose, as some of our best companies, have taken a very long time, some of them even longer than 15 years. We have a company that's going to go public. I can't say the name next quarter. I think we invested exactly 14 years ago. And this has two implications. I mean, firstly, it means that things will really change along the way. And so you want founders that can adapt with this and also be patient enough. And then finally, you've got to be sure that they want to work with you and you want to work with them, because it's almost like a marriage. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Scott, turning to you. Your firm, you have investments in companies like Persado and NetData. So also you're kind of speaking with writing checks and speaking with your wallet, if you will. Why Greece? Do you believe that the Greek companies can have, or they can develop, a comparative advantage that stems from their location? And if so, are there specific sectors that you think that is true for?
Well, the situation was different with each of the companies you mentioned, so I'll explain a little bit about each. The motivation behind Persado, candidly, mirrors much of what Laurel just described. A brilliant founding team with a great idea targeting what we thought to be a very large market. That company the idea happened to be along the lines of the business I built in my pre-venture career. So I had some understanding of what they were trying to accomplish and what might be required to build a business of that type. And it was sort of incidental that the founders and the company that they were spinning out of, which was Upstream, happened to be in Athens. It turns out the fact that the core of the engineering and product team of that company was in Athens gave it some unfair advantages. They had and continue to have a tremendously talented engineering and product team that is half the cost of building a similar team, if we could even find that level of talent in New York City or San Francisco, as an example. So there certainly was some benefits on that front. There also is, I think, real benefit in I wouldn't say necessarily just Greek companies, but European companies kind of being born global, unlike many US domestic companies that really have a core focus on the United States and struggle when they think about expanding internationally. I think the DNA of many companies that are born here in Greece and other parts of Europe are sort of global and international from the get-go, and that really helps them as they think about expanding beyond Europe into the US and elsewhere. So that's Persado. NetData, candidly, my partner who discovered NetData, who is an expert in open source, had no idea that the company was based in Greece. They simply were following what was a tremendous amount of open source activity and love for NetData and its founder. And that kind of led us to him and ultimately led us to the investment.
What I'm hearing, and actually Laurel reflected that a little bit too, is that company comes first, location comes second. And at the end of the day, if there's companies that go after globally competitive, large global markets with some form of competitive advantage, this is something that will hit the screen of investors. Keeping up with that same sort of trend, James, I want to turn to you. CVC actually appears to have been more systematic. Laurel and Scott talked about, sort of one company here and there. You guys have been more systematic about investing in Greece in the last few years and across several sectors, not just high tech. What's made you think that the time was right to start investing in Greece with a more long-term outlook?
Andreas, you're right. We have indeed been investing in Greece quite actively the last 4 or 5 years now, and are very fortunate to now have investments across several sectors. So we have healthcare, travel and leisure, technology, and food, and a lot of those are indeed very domestic market focused and not as global as maybe some of the technology companies that some of the other panelists are invested in today. Needless to say, as you would expect, it's been a journey for us as a team and as a firm to get to this point. And frankly, we've been looking at investment opportunities in Greece for a long time before we started our investments in late 2016. The bar is high for us, right? Because we're long-term investments, 5 to 10 years, and we're taking very large illiquid bets, on average 300-400 million per investment. So the macro is very important to what we do. So a couple of things had to align. So I'd say maybe 3 things. So first, clearly the macro. So if you rewind the clock back to late 2016, 2017, I think it's fair to say the world still had some more uncertainty around where Greece was headed. And you could just look at the spreads at the time versus where we are today. We certainly did not have a crystal ball, but we took a view that better days were ahead. So we got comfortable with the macro. Second, our first investment was really in a space where, as a firm, we've had tremendous experience, and that's namely healthcare and more specifically the healthcare provider space, so hospitals. We've invested before in Spain, France, and the Nordics in hospitals, so we knew that this was a space we knew well and where we could be value-add partners to the management team and really help build a new leading healthcare group, which is what we've been fortunate to have accomplished thus far. So a space where we know. And indeed, having that first investment off to a good start clearly allowed us to get more conviction as a team, as a firm, to continue building from there. So those are the 2 key components. And frankly, the last third one is the people. So it's important that we have native Greeks on the team. We're eager to make the investments, champion them, but also work with the management teams during our whole period to help grow the businesses. So we're thrilled to be invested in across several sectors. We're excited about our pipeline and are very much committed to continuing to invest in Greece in different sectors.
That's great to hear. Great to hear, James. Nikita, turning to you and maybe going a little bit more from the macro to the micro. I mean, obviously, James and his firm, they make control investments and private equity investments. So these are really, really big checks, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars. From the venture side, for all of us who are more in the minority investment space, growth and expansion stage checks and the whole ecosystem in Greece, I would say, is not yet as developed as the great work that we're seeing happen on the earlier stages. You've got, companies like Big Pie and Marathon and Venture Friends and a number of others that I think actually do a great job at the seed and the early stage level in finding and maybe grooming some of these entrepreneurs so that they're ready to take the next step. Now, Insight is really a global leader in growth and expansion stage investing for technology companies specifically. So your investments in Greece in companies like Tignosis, I should say, in the American pronunciation, they have not gone unnoticed, right? A lot of people, a lot of the local investors want to talk to people like you. And I'm sure a lot of the entrepreneurs want to talk to people like you because that's a part of the funding ecosystem that's not yet as developed within Greece. How can the Greek entrepreneurs, what would you tell them? How can they develop a more systematic approach to attracting expansion stage capital from the likes of you?
It's a great question, and it's one where thankfully we don't have to solve the problem de novo. There's other countries that are a couple of chapters ahead, and looking at how that experience can be adapted to the Greek reality, but also very much reflecting the Greek reality, so it's customized properly is pretty critical. You're right. We intend that our goal is to become the scale-up partner for the early stage Greek ecosystem, to be able to enable that larger check, which may not start large. So a $10 to $20 million growth stage check, which on the life cycle of a deal can become several hundred million as the business requires it for M&A, for primary, for secondary capital. That's exactly what we've done over the last several years in Israel, and it's worked tremendously well, where we work with the local ecosystem of earlier stage VCs. We become a partner that can enable companies not just to have the capital to expand locally, but open up the US and European markets for them. And I think that the Greek ecosystem is developing in an equivalent type of way, where the early stage funds understand that a growth partner is an essential part of the scale-up journey. And several of the deals that have happened over the last couple of years very much point in that direction. The important advice for Greek entrepreneurs is not to try to cut and paste the experience of early Greek successes or what's happening in other countries. Play to your strengths, play to the particularities of your business, your ecosystem. Do not assume, for instance, that you have to leave Greece to succeed. Do not assume that you have to relocate your life to Boston or Silicon Valley or New York City as an essential ingredient of success of your company. The fact that Greece has phenomenal ability to provide smart human capital across functional areas of relevance to the software business is something that is very rare to replicate in other countries, where you can maybe get developers, but not customer success, not sales and marketing. Greece has the ability to provide phenomenal personnel to enable that type of scale-up growth. At, by the way, a cost advantage that is very very important. There's also a change in how the growth ecosystem is vetting companies that is important. Some of it has to do with existing kind of success stories. Another part has to do with the availability of capital and how much there is out there. But you no longer need companies to have kind of ticked every box in the second order analysis of the income statement. It's enough to have a great team going after a big market with a proven ability to disrupt. Growth capital sees that ahead and is able to invest behind it. So that's how entrepreneurs should be thinking.
What I'm hearing from you is, don't try to pretend that you are something that you're not. Don't try to just copy somebody else's rule book. Find your particular comparative advantages if you're in Greece and play to your strength, which makes a lot of sense. James, I'm going to go right back to you, because you guys at CVC, you've invested in Scrooge in the e-commerce world, but you've also, as you said, made investments in healthcare and new food. How do you think of innovation in sectors that are non-technology? What role does that play?
It's a great question, because I know a lot of the focus of this panel and the forum is really on the tech side. And as you said, we're thrilled to have partnered with George Hatziriou and the Scrooge team. But really, innovation is key to all of our investments. And fundamentally, when we think about the opportunities in Greece, we think there's a lot of untapped growth still through innovation. And at its core, that's coming from exactly what Nikitas was just talking about, which is to say that the human capital and talent that's there in the country. But to make it a bit more tangible, what do I mean? Maybe two examples: healthcare. Our investment in the Hellenic Healthcare Group. Innovation was key to our thesis there. First, we were very focused on investing in new technology, bringing the best and latest technology and equipment to our hospitals. That's crucial. Why? It means that's how you attract the best doctors to the hospital group. And of course, that's why the patients want to come to your hospital groups, because they know they have the best facilities, the best equipment, the newest technology. So you want to stay ahead of the innovation curve for your patients. Two, telehealth, that came up in the previous panel with Michael Kratsios. Obviously, with COVID, it's become a huge area of focus. We were fortunately investing already in telehealth and establishing the systems and the apps for our patients and customers to have that level of connectivity with their doctors and providers. And so we've been fortunate now, as demand has obviously spiraled with COVID, to been ahead of the curve and be able to offer that solution to our patients. So innovation key, obviously, in healthcare. Food, maybe not the obvious place for innovation, but when you think about it, what's going on globally with organic products, with plant-based products, these are still, I would say, nascent in the Greek market, but clearly global trends. And our thesis in Vivarti is very much investing in those areas. So, investing in organic, investing in plant-based products, not necessarily copying the foreign fads and trends, but really taking advantage of the richness of the Greek and diversity of the Greek cuisine and working with the local farmers, et cetera, but really driving innovation there as well.
What I'm hearing from you, James, which you see it in the US as well, is that the idea of technology companies being something that is a vertically specific sector is really starting to erode. In the information age, every company that is a large company has to leverage technology. So innovation and some form of technological progress and what we say kenotomia, right? Innovation is essential in all kinds of different sectors. Okay, next two questions are going to be more tactical. First to Scott, then to Laurel. Scott, first to you, real quick. What should a startup think before contacting an international VC like you? What will cause you to pay quick attention to an investing inquiry from an entrepreneur?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that. What should they be thinking, and then what would cause me to pay attention? I think for any startup, whether it's contacting some international VC or a VC in general, they should be thinking about who has the type of capabilities that can be most helpful to them. That might be domain expertise in the sector they play in. That might be geographic footprint that's relevant to the areas of the world that they hope to expand into. That might be an individual partner that has lived the battles in a business of a similar type. But I think many early stage entrepreneurs forget that they're the scarce commodity, not us. There's a lot of venture folks running around giving away money. The scarce commodity is super talented founders, and they really should be evaluating any of us the same way we're trying to evaluate them and pick the firm, the platform, and the individual partner that they think can be most helpful to their business. Now, the other side of that coin, what would get me most interested? All I can say is a really compelling idea. And it's hard to tell you exactly how that gets communicated, because sometimes it's in words and sometimes it's in a meeting. But probably like Laurel, and I'll let her weigh in, there are very few early stage ideas that I wouldn't take a meeting to hear more about.
What I hear from you, and it's so true, you can tell, especially in the age of email, if someone hasn't done research and they're just blasting out the same generic, email to investors, it's such a turnoff. Whereas if someone just does a modicum of work to figure out who's the right person and why am I reaching out to them, it makes such a big difference. Couldn't agree more with you on that. Laurel, equally tactical. A question that arises over and over again, given the size of the US market for startups, is the timing of entering the US. What would you advise startups about when is the right time to think about entering the US market, or any other for that matter, a large global market? When is the right time?
So I think firstly, it depends what you're doing. I mean, so I think not all companies, want to go to the US. I mean, if you're, for example, we have a food delivery company in Helsinki, and they at this point definitely won't be going to the US. They're going to Asia and other parts of Europe. And sometimes those markets are big enough. But I think in software, which is probably the most relevant, I can't imagine not going to the US at all. And I think it depends on the market. If you're in a small place like Greece or Israel, actually, then you would want to go to the US almost as you have the first version of your product. Whereas if you're in France or the UK or Germany, I mean, you can probably get some product market fit and validate with customers and get product marketing right. But I think a couple of things when you do go, I mean, I think firstly, and we always end up talking from our experience. I bet you there's some panelists here that won't agree with me, but in our experience, one founder has to move to the US. And I would recommend they literally take their best person, the one that they say we can't afford to lose in Europe. The one, could be in sales, could be a sales engineer, could be in marketing. And you take at least the two of them, maybe even three, and then let them open up the office. It helps set the culture, the tone of the office. And we haven't invested in a company actually without the founder being the one very involved in the first sales in the US, even if they're initially telesales being done from London. And then I think that you've got to make sure the EU office that's left behind runs well, because we've had a few situations where the founder moves and everything's going quite well in the US and the EU office starts falling over. I think you've got to hire a few great locals, and my recommendation is they report straight to the CEO, at least those initial hires, so it's seen how important and how senior they are. Hire always from the competition. This is always super helpful. You learn a lot. And then the last, which is a small tactical point, choose your location smartly. Don't be swayed by, if you're in Greece trying to open an office in, Palo Alto, not easy. You got to, speak night as day. Think about costs, think about where your competition are. And maybe think out of the box. There are a few locations that are quite interesting, have a lot of tech talent, and are not your normal, either New York, Boston, or, San Francisco.
Thank you. Sage advice. So we've gone from macro, talked micro, some advice. I want to move to the future now with the last two questions. And the first one is to Alex, right? So we've already, as you said, the government's done a great job in attracting foreign direct investment from companies like Pfizer, Cisco, Microsoft, Digital Realty, a whole bunch of companies that have made recent investments in Greece by establishing or increasing their presence, which of course is a huge vote of confidence. How can that momentum be maintained or even accelerated?
Thank you very much, Andreas, and very interesting answer by all the panelists. Of course, the full answer to your question, keep on doing what we're doing. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and we will be working on gaining people's change in the country. Now, there were some interesting stories and takeaways from the case mentioned. I would highlight Pfizer. As you know, the digital hub in Thessaloniki, and what they found was that 23% of their applicants came from outside Greece, primarily the Greek diaspora. I would say one of the secret advantages of the country is the global pool of talent that it has that goes way beyond borders. And of course, Pfizer ended up being so swamped by TVs that they ended up opening another hub, this time for services. The Microsoft case is an interesting one. Microsoft selected Greece as its to create a data center region with 3 data centers, and of course, this was due to its geographical location. They picked Greece amongst the countries in Southeast Europe, but also due to its political stability. Of course, you don't want to handle data in a location where there is political risk. So Greece as a leader of political stability in the region. What we want to do in the coming months and years is continue with the digital infrastructure, continue with the reforms. We have ahead of us the RRF, the big European Union investment, 32 billion for 20% goes to digital. And so there's a lot of projects that we have in the pipeline. And we just have to keep on delivering, and the investment we believe will keep on. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Nikita, I want to close with you. In our prep, you mentioned about how, because I always like to close with a note of optimism, right? I mean, things are going well, but can always go better. So you had some interesting observations about how a crisis is not something to be wasted. So do you actually see advantages for Greek companies and entrepreneurs stemming out of the fact that the country has been in one of the worst economic crises anywhere in the world for the past 10 years? How is that a good thing? Please tell us and close us off.
Well, this goes under the large category of a horrible silver lining over a really bad situation that I think we all hope and pray that the country gets to overcome swiftly and successfully. But you're right. There's always opportunities that emerge. For instance, what I was alluding to earlier, our best and brightest are more likely now to join this new ecosystem of entrepreneurship, as opposed to seeking a job in a bank or in the public sector. It is vital to the ecosystem that we not only attract them, but also, as was mentioned just now, people from the diaspora who now have an opportunity to be reunited with family, work in an exciting job, be rewarded daily by the weather that we don't get to experience here in New York City. So if you look at places like Dublin, like Berlin, that have become tech ecosystems, it's because they were able to attract really smart people from within and from without. I think if we do that, we can create companies that are not only growing like crazy, but are also as lean as any company anywhere in the world. So, and that combination of growth and profitability can help the system thrive.
Thank you so much, Nikita. And with that, we're out of time. I thought it was a great discussion. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Seven Endeavor, for organizing such a great event. Let's keep them coming. Thank you all. Have a great continuation.
Προερχόμενος από τεχνικό background, είχα την εντύπωση ότι η τεχνολογία και το προϊόν ήταν το α και το μέγα για την επιτυχία μιας επιχείρησης. Αυτό που διαπίστωσα στην πορεία είναι ότι ένα επιτυχημένο business αποτελείται από τη σύνθεση πολλών παραμέτρων και η τεχνολογία είναι απλώς μία από αυτές.
Το να επικεντρωθεί σε ένα προϊόν και σε μία αγορά μεγιστοποιεί τις πιθανότητες επιτυχίας μιας νεοφυούς επιχείρησης. Φυσικά αυτό το προϊόν και η αγορά πρέπει να είναι αρκετά μεγάλα ώστε να είναι και επενδύσιμα, δηλαδή να μπορείς να έχεις τουλάχιστον ένα κύκλο εργασιών 30-40 εκατομμύρια. Αυτό που συμβαίνει συχνά είναι όταν έχεις μια πρώτη επιτυχία σε ένα συγκεκριμένο αγορά και συγκεκριμένο προϊόν, να δοκιμάσεις άλλα πράγματα. Και αυτό ουσιαστικά κάνει το όλο εγχείρημα εκθετικά δυσκολότερο για να είσαι επιτυχημένος και στα δύο. Εμείς κάναμε αυτό το λάθος στο Blue Ground, ανοιχτήκαμε σε άλλα κομμάτια και τελικά αναγκαστήκαμε να αποτραβηχτούμε από τη δεύτερη αγορά και να επιστρέφουμε στα βασικά μας. Οπότε αυτό που πιστεύω είναι το πιο σημαντικό είναι να έχεις την προσήλωση και την πειθαρχία να μείνεις σε ένα προϊόν και να πεις όχι σε καινούργια πράγματα που μπορεί να παρουσιάζονται.
When I started the company, I wish I knew that the original idea was just an excuse to get started, and that through the journey I would have to pivot many times in order to get to something with market value. I also wish I knew that it would take much more time than initially expected in order to build a worthy company, and that during the journey there would be many moments that everything would seem lost.
Όταν ξεκινούσαμε τη Signal, θα ήθελα κάποιος να μας είχε πει πόσο δύσκολο να πετύχεις την κουλτούρα την οποία οραματίζεσαι. Ήταν μια διαδικασία πολύ δύσκολη, χρονοβόρα και ήθελε μεγάλη προσπάθεια. Το καλό είναι όμως ότι όταν την πετύχεις την κουλτούρα την οποία οραματίζεσαι, τότε για μαγείας κάποια προβλήματα που σε φαινόντουσαν βουνό στο παρελθόν γίνονται βατά.
I wish I knew that managing people is far more difficult than managing software.
Welcome back to the first Innovative Greeks online conference. So far, we have heard great stories about innovative Greeks around the world, their interesting ideas and their sort of global perspective. In this panel, we will talk more about the local ecosystem, the potential it has, and of course the challenges that are ahead of us in our attempt to establish a substantial tech scene here in Greece. And I think there is no one more qualified to speak about this than people that have already done this. So without further delay, I would like to welcome some of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in Greece, people that started their endeavors here in Greece and they managed to build innovative, successful global businesses. So I would like to start the introductions from Marios Stavropoulos, the co-founder and former CEO of Softomotive. And I'm saying former because very recently his company was acquired by Microsoft in one of the biggest and most prestigious exits of the local ecosystem. Mario, welcome. I would also like to welcome Alex Hadjieleftheriou, the co-founder and CEO of Blueground. Blueground was founded 8-9 years ago, I think. It's a real estate technology company that is managing thousands of properties in more than 15 cities. It has raised tens of thousands of dollars, and it's definitely one of the fast-growing companies in Greece. So I'd also like to welcome George Hadjigeorgiou, who's the co-founder and CEO of Scrooge. Under normal circumstances, I don't think I would even need to explain what Scrooge is. I mean, you've done something incredible here. I believe in the future, in the Greek dictionary, the word e-commerce, Scrooge will be the next to the word e-commerce, which is the proof of your big success. But I think it's also interesting to mention that very recently you announced the acquisition of another smaller Greek tech startup, and I would like to get back to this later in this discussion. I'd also like to welcome Yannis Martinos, the founder and CEO of the Signal Group. Signal is a tech company in the shipping sector that is very successful and has managed to get at least 50% of the oil shipping market segment, and very recently also announced the launch of an incubation and investment branch for their group. Finally, I would like to welcome Thanos Papagelis, the co-founder and CEO of Epignosis. Epignosis is one of the biggest successes of the Greek startup ecosystem, which without any fanfare has managed to win some of the biggest markets, the American and the European market, in what they do. They are in the education technology industry. They have also raised millions of dollars in investment, and definitely one of the biggest successes. Finally, I would like to welcome the Deputy Minister of Development and Investment, Dr. Christos Dimas, who is the driving force behind the recent series of very positive reforms about the innovation and the technology sector in Greece, which believe can be proved to be a game changer in the near future. Thank you all for being here with us today. And I will start with my first question regarding an assessment of the current situation of the Greek ecosystem. I mean, just by making the introductions, we all notice some very big successes. At the same time, I mean, we see acquisitions, exits, big investments, launch of investment arms from existing companies, acquisitions from Greek companies of other Greek companies, signs of maturity and growth. At the same time, I mean, if we see the global picture, 9 out of 10 biggest companies in the world are in the tech sector. Zoom alone is worth more than the 7 biggest airline companies. Tesla is bigger than the 9 biggest traditional automotive manufacturers. As Mark Andreessen has stated a couple of years ago, software is eating the world. So I will start with Yannis, my fellow member of the SEV Innovation Committee, who is also known about his pragmatic and cosmopolitan view. What is going on exactly with the Greek startup ecosystem? Have we turned overnight to a tech powerhouse, or are we just seeing tiny bits, of a massive wave of technology that is storming the planet eventually?
Thank you, Spiro. Great to be here. Clearly, there's a global technology wave that is sweeping the planet, and Greece as well. So, as a country, we're continuously learning how to harness the energy from this wave to our benefit. For the past, the past year, for example, we've had, as an example, 2 big success stories, Softomotive, and it's great to have Marius also here on the panel, and InstaShop. And this has created incredible, inspiring stories for all of us who are part of the Greek ecosystem. However, this wave, the global wave, has been accelerating for years, and to answer your question, I really think that we're basically surfing the wave, and at least we're floating. We're not sinking, which is great. And this wave is big, and we're getting great benefits from it. But if we really want to accelerate further, we need to become better at harnessing wave energy. And the good news is, in order to achieve that, is that you don't necessarily have to do things which are game-changing as a society. In some ways, you just have to unblock the potential that the Greek talent has, and that the new funding sources that are becoming available in the Greek market, either through European funds and the Equi Fund as an example, all these initiatives can actually, if the talent is unleashed, you can have a real miracle that takes place. We've already made a lot of progress in unblocking things. I think over the last decade, the Greek government, and increasingly so, has been unified in helping Greek start-uppers. But also, one thing that is important is that to think about as a future entrepreneur is that you cannot expect everything from your ecosystem. And to paraphrase JFK, sometimes you should not ask what the ecosystem can do for you, but what can you do for the ecosystem? And I think that's really important.
Good. Alex, what are your thoughts on the same matter? How the ecosystem has changed since you started? I believe you started around 2013. Are things harder or easier today to start a company and to succeed?
Sure. Great to be here. Thank you, Spiro. I think we're definitely seeing a much more mature startup ecosystem with a track record of success. Very important developments to note here. We all know that significant capital has been raised by Greek-based startups, more than $250 million. We have investments by major renowned investors from venture capital and private equity, and we saw a few in the previous panel. Significant exits. So that really has led to the maturity of the ecosystem. And when it comes to being a founder and starting a company, this is a much better environment to do so, because there is significantly higher availability of capital for seed-stage companies. You have more successful founders that can mentor new and upcoming ones. And you have the meaningful connections with growth stage funds abroad, which can be helpful in order to get follow-on rounds faster and more effectively. Also, one thing that's very important is that local talent is now increasingly drawn to startups. they've seen success stories, they've seen people develop within the companies, they've seen international successes, so they can see the upside, and you can get better talent involved in this new company. And of course, one thing that if you ask me what continues to be difficult, I think we're doing pretty well at the seed stage, but then when you move to growth stage, there's still not a lot of available investors at that stage. But this is true to all peripheral economies in Europe, right? So what we can do there is really Greek founders need to really focus on creating businesses that are addressing big markets, look into international expansion early on, and take fundraising seriously and strategically. But overall, just to sum up, I see a much better environment to continue on the way that we're riding, as you said.
Thano, your company addresses some of the most mature markets, like the one in North America and many big markets in Europe. I'd like to hear your opinion about how a Greek technology company deals with international competition. Do we have any comparative advantages? Do we have any disadvantages?
Thank you, Spiros, and nice to be here. My experience is that expanding internationally is complex, but not nearly as complex as most believe. Internet has turned the whole world into a small village in many ways, and assuming we have a good tech product and a decent go-to-market strategy, it's much easier to attract customers globally than ever before. Of course, the competition in international markets is more intense, but personally, at least, I consider it a form of noise. The competition is a form of noise in the sense that there is little you can do about it. I prefer to compare with our past self and see how it progressed internally through time. Now, around Greece, what we are seeing is that there is an abundance of good talent people. There is a very good balance, actually, between talent and competitive cost structure, when especially compare Greece with other big tech hubs. I also believe that work ethics is high and loyalty, although not granted, is commonplace. On the negatives, I would say that the number of well-rounded professionals that can work as role models is still very small, and we also lack political and financial stability that are important for long-term growth.
Good. I guess Microsoft also saw some of those advantages when they decided to make an offer to Marios and his company. But I would like to hear from Marios, what are the challenges and peculiarities a giant like Microsoft faces when they try to integrate a Greek company into their organization? Mario, do you have any horror stories to share with us about, Microsoft facing the monster of the Greek bureaucracy?
No, I wouldn't say that there were any horror stories. Actually, you mentioned in your introduction that we've recently been acquired, and it certainly feels so, but looking back, it's been 9 months already. So it's incredible how time flies. It's been a very interesting process, a very interesting journey. I wouldn't claim that it's been a seamless and straightforward process. Integrating, the integration of our team and of our relatively small company with Microsoft. I would say that the most important thing here that ensures a straightforward integration is culture. And in our case, this played an important role in the sense that, we were also a global company. We were used to work with people all around the globe. We had a global customer base. So this was very helpful for us in getting accustomed with the processes of Microsoft. There wasn't anything related to bureaucracy that really kept us back. It was mostly the lengthy process of the soft automotive team becoming part of the Microsoft machine, which is something that I think that we've achieved pretty well so far.
That's good to hear. George, is the Greek market ready to support disruptive technology like the one Scrooge is trying to introduce into retail? Let me give you a personal example. Because no matter how high-tech your company is, it's still not an island. It interacts with the rest of the economy, the rest of the local market, right? So my experience with Scrooge is, while I'm in your website, it's like I'm in Amazon. The experience is great, the user interface is great, and the moment I click the purchase button, the magic is gone. I still have to deal with the mamas and papas retail stores and the Greek banks and the Greek courier companies. Can a company be innovative and technologically advanced in the Greek market?
So it's not always the case that when you go to small merchants, the experience is worse, but there are cases. The truth of the matter is that Greece lacks some of the basic infrastructure for e-commerce, but I think that actually that can be an opportunity as well. So if you have difficult problems to solve, you probably are the first one to solve them, and that will give you a competitive advantage in the future. I don't think that Greece or any other country that has obstacles is actually a hostile place for someone to start up a company. I think there's always an opportunity. If there is a chance, you can go after the difficult things, and you will need some companies to do the hard stuff anyway, because otherwise you can't expect everything from the government or from other companies to do that.
Nice. Deputy Minister, one of the most interesting initiatives in your term so far is Elevate Greece. It's an attempt to register all the Greek startup companies. To be honest, when I first heard about this, I said, this is impossible. How can you define what a startup is? There are so many different cases, companies that have a big operation in Greece, but their headquarters are abroad. Greek entrepreneurs, we saw quite a few yesterday, that want to create a hub here in Greece. Many different cases, many different definitions, but you surprised us with a startup can-do mentality. You just went ahead, defined something that actually works, and we'd like you to share with us some of the first findings of this. Can you give us can you share with us some numbers that give us a better sense of the size and the dynamic of the Greek startup ecosystem?
Yes. First of all, Spiro, thank you very much, and thank you, Seb, for the invitation. I want to state and underline that up until recently, the Greek state did not know how many startups there are in Greece, in which sectors they operate, how many employees they have, what budgets they have. So we had absolutely no information about the startup ecosystem. So practically it was impossible, even if you wanted to legislate specific initiatives for the startup ecosystem, practically you didn't know who it would affect. So we started looking at best practices of other countries, and we did realize that in some cases the startup registry had worked effectively. And take into account that there isn't, as you correctly said, an acceptable international definition about what consists a startup. So we did ask the experts. We asked the National Council for Research and Innovation, which is composed by people of the ecosystem as well. And they gave us a very good definition of how we can define startups. So what does Elevate Greece practically do? It has 6 main goals. it works as a national startup registry. It maps the players, actors of the ecosystem. It monitors progress. It offers networking opportunities with businesses, addresses local and global investors, and helps for the extroversion of the ecosystem, and allows the state to tailor-make measures to support the ecosystem. Up until now, in the 4 months of the operation of Elevate Greece, we have 183 companies that have been registered. I know that 200 applications are now pending, so we hope that within March we will have doubled or almost doubled at least the number of the startup ecosystems. They have 1,911 employees. They have raised more than 61 million funds from investments from funds. Most of the startups come from life sciences. Then, from what I remember, the next two sectors are tourism, environment, and agri-tech is quite high. And we also have companies from big data and fintech. And as we did expect, most of the startups are from the region of Attica, then from Central Macedonia, Crete, and Western Greece. So investing in research and innovation is a strategic priority of the government, and trying to take out some of the difficulties that were creating problems to the ecosystem is the priority for the Greek government. We don't believe that the state can actually operate the ecosystem, but we do believe that it can be much more friendly to the startups and the ecosystem.
Nice. The numbers are at least encouraging. Do you think the tech sector will ever become a significant part of the Greek GDP?
It must become a significant part of the GDP, and it cannot come from one day to another. But as we said, we have given extremely important incentives, tax incentives, especially with super deduction for companies that operate in R&D, and this has helped attract many companies in the tech sector. You did mention the names, whether that is Microsoft, Applied Materials, Amazon, Tesla, and more companies in the tech sector. But we must take advantage of the human capital that we have. So investing further in education, which will create employees, individuals that are capable of working with artificial intelligence, for example, in many different sectors, is a crucial priority for the government in order to become more attractive for tech companies to come and establish their R&D centers in the country. I think that 2020 was an important year in order to understand that tourism is crucial for the Greek GDP, but we must try to have a business model as a country that includes other sectors apart from tourism as well. And the tech sector is extremely important in order to become more competitive at a global scale.
Great. It's good to know that we have your attention, because, in the past it was not always the case. From the Greek state in general. So let's talk a little bit about the future. Sooner or later, we all hope that the pandemic will end, but it will definitely change the world in a permanent way. Remote working has come to stay. E-commerce now is predominant in several sectors, even in B2B. Words like Zoom, digital nomads, cloud have become integral part of our daily lives. Do you think this opens new opportunities for Greece, since the physical location of a country plays a smaller, maybe different role? I would like to start with Alex. Alex, due to the nature of your business, you had to quickly establish a physical presence in many locations. You yourself spend a lot of time in America and elsewhere. Your team had to be fully distributed. An American company would be required to do this much later and to a lesser extent. Do you think that was a disadvantage for you and other Greek companies? I mean, the fact that they had to become distributed and open different hubs in many other countries from the very early stage. Do you think that after the pandemic, your company, but also other companies, will be able to do more things from Greece?
Sure. I think Greece is a relatively small market, right? So this means that companies, startups starting from Greece have to be looking internationally earlier than counterparts in larger markets. And this comes positives and negatives. For that case, the positive is because you have to expand earlier, then you set your entire organization for expansion. So subsequent expansions are actually easier to do. Also because Greece, being a smaller market, is not as competitive as the US or some of the Western European markets, can actually be successful faster and gain market leadership faster and be profitable faster, which being profitable in a city is a major proof point for investors. So that will help follow rounds. Actually, it's a tactic in the US for some of the startups to launch first in secondary or tertiary markets before launching in major cities like New York and LA for exactly the same reasons. And then in terms of the location that you mentioned, fact in our case that we had presence in multiple markets earlier allowed us to optimize the team location depending on the relative advantages of each location. So, for example, our engineering team is in Athens, extremely strong talent here, and with lower cost compared to Western Europe or the US. In the US, for example, we have a portion of our team who's doing branding and communications, which has a very strong characteristic for that market. And then when you look into what can be considered as negatives of having multiple teams in a distributed fashion, it's more difficult to maintain a consistent culture. But of course, there are things you can do to mitigate, especially now where everyone is, bringing in remote working and virtual working into every company. So to your question, I think whether we can do more from Greece, I think Greece can be a great launching pad if you want to start and get proof points in a relatively small market like Greece. But as the company scales and you get presence in more markets, you have to expand. You have to have presence in other countries. That's for two reasons. One, to be successful locally, you need local presence. And then secondly, to take advantage of a larger talent pool. And I think before I close, and I think it's important to mention, it is true that Greek startups need to think internationally earlier, but they should not do so prematurely. Things like product market fit, unit economics being strong, is an absolute first step before expanding into another market.
Nice. Thano, is it possible to sell from Greece to international markets? I mean, even if your product is digital, quite often customers require you to be, in a relative proximity to them. Is it the skills that we are missing here? We don't know how to sell to international markets, or the need to be close to your customers will be inevitable. Has the pandemic changed at all the buying habits of your customers?
My experience is that it is totally possible actually to support international markets from Greece, especially if you focus on small or medium businesses that can be attracted through inbound channels. It becomes more difficult if you focus on very big enterprises where proximity can play an important role in closing the deal. Around needed skills, we have managed actually to find a lot of talented people here in Greece, although we lack people with related experience. Strangely, right now it is harder to find technical talent than marketing and sales talent locally. Around COVID, my opinion is that COVID has accelerated the digitalization of the economy, but we need to keep in mind that it was a process that started a long time ago and before COVID. I truly believe that after COVID, we will return to a new normal, which more or less will be similar to the old normal with small but important differences.
Yanni, your headquarters, as you know, for most of us, are abroad. Could this change? What do you believe should be done in order for this to change? And if it is not, realistic to expect that this will change anytime soon, what functions of a company are more suitable to be served here in Greece?
So currently our approach is to base many of our activities in Greece, with our Athens office mostly working on engineering, data science, and data operations. But we also do have some engineering activities in Poland as well, and the synergies between the two engineering teams has been great because they've been learning from each other. And our team here in Athens is truly amazing. I couldn't be happier. We worked hard on our culture, and it's amazing to see how far a team can get when they work harmonically together. As far as commercial activities are concerned, though, unfortunately, I think that some of the Anglo-Saxon destinations of the world have an advantage. People and teams there have more experience in selling digital products, and there's a lot to learn from those areas as well. So our approach there is to have a position also commercially, and have our Greek team learn from that as well as we're growing that operation. And I think that's key in general. It's to try to get the best out of both worlds when there are situations where your team can learn from a different geography. So I would say the natural split would be to have a lot of the commercial activities outside of Greece, not all of them, but a few. And to have a lot of the engineering work and science work in Greece. So if this is going to change, I think it will be hard for it to change. It will change, maybe it will change slowly in the short term, maybe faster in the longer term. But the Greek legal framework, although amazing work is being done to it as we speak, it's not yet familiar for many of the VCs. They want to invest in companies that have their headquarters in jurisdictions which are abroad. So especially for companies that depend on external funding, I think that's really important. Plus, I think that for the Greek government, as companies scale up, usually they don't really have profitability. So for a while, anyways, there's not a lot of a tax incentive maybe for the Greek government to really bring the headquarters to Greece. Although I think that will be changing as the companies are becoming more mature.
As we're running out of time, I would like to make a last question to Deputy Minister about exactly the things that Yannis mentioned before. So, as we said in the beginning of this discussion, we've seen a lot of positive reforms recently. Tax incentives for digital nomads and Greeks abroad, tax deduction for R&D, tax incentives for angel investors. What else should we expect, in the following months or years to come in this direction?
First of all, allow me to say that if we compare ourselves, our country, to the EU average in R&D spending, we are 16th out of 27 EU member states. We are spending 1.27% of our GDP, while the target for the EU member states for 2020 was to spend at least 3%. But even if we compare ourselves to the EU member states in innovation, and we see the data from the European Innovation Scoreboard, we are in the 20th position out of 27 member states. So we are underperforming, and there is a need to proceed with effective and decisive steps forward. I will briefly mention some of the important initiatives that we're undertaking. First of all, is the creation of an innovation district in Attica, a natural matchmaking ground, which will include businesses, enterprises, startups, spin-offs, where we hope to create to cultivate the conditions for the creation of synergies for the production of innovative products and services. We are also creating a technological park in Thessaloniki, the Thessintech, where we hope to attract companies to establish their R&D centers in Thessaloniki. We are upgrading our research infrastructure. We have signed 3 important agreements with the European Investment Bank, and we're discussing now for 6 additional. We are giving more flexibility to our researchers and the research centers. We are simplifying and codifying all of the legislation for spin-offs, for example, or we are proceeding with the establishment of technology transfer offices for our research centers and our universities. And we are discussing within the government more incentives for R&D spending, especially in social security offsets. So if we want to be competitive with our European counterparts, and if we want to have a leading role in the Balkans and Southeastern Europe, it's absolutely necessary to proceed with large, decisive steps in order to win ground, because in the last decade, due to the economic crisis, we did lose a lot of ground compared to the other EU member states.
Unfortunately, our time is up. Thank you all for this very interesting discussion, and we look forward to seeing you again in the same forum to discuss again about innovation in Greece. Have a nice evening.
Το ρολόι, το φορητό ρολόι από το 17ο αιώνα, που μας έδωσε ένα κοινό μέτρο του χρόνου με δημοκρατικό τρόπο, χωρίς ιεραρχία, και άλλαξε για πάντα τον τρόπο που συνεργαζόμαστε.
Η απάντηση στην ερώτηση ποια είναι η αγαπημένη μου καινοτομία είναι το ίντερνετ. Πέρα ότι ασχολούμαι με το ίντερνετ πάρα πολλά χρόνια, αντικειμενικά το ίντερνετ δίνει απεριόριστη και εύκολη πρόσβαση σε ενημέρωση, επικοινωνία, γνώση, εργασία, προϊόντα, υπηρεσίες, διασκέδαση. Οπότε ο ρόλος που έχει παίξει στη ζωή μας και παίζει είναι πολύ σημαντικός.
Ο Λεωνάρντο ντα Βίντσι, αγαπημένος εφευρέτης όλων των εποχών, για όσα έχει πετύχει σε τόσους διαφορετικούς τομείς.
Hi everyone. We're very happy to be here with you tonight or this morning for those of you who are in the US. Congrats to Sev and Endeavor for this amazing event, Innovative Greeks. I mean, all of us in this panel have been involved in the tech ecosystem one way or another and always believed in its potential, but it's really encouraging and inspiring to see that this potential is now more widely recognized. In this panel, we're going to discuss about Equifund, which was a very important program for the Greek tech ecosystem, as well as about, in general, about the Greek tech ecosystem, its progress and its aspirations. We are very happy to have with us representatives from all the venture capital funds who have been thankful recipients of the support of the Equifund, as well as two of the key people who were both involved and enabled the Equifund program. So specifically, we're going to hear from Katerina Pramatari from Unifund, Myrto Papathanu from Metavalon, Dimitris Kalavros from Velocity, George Gialis from Marathon, and Aristos Doxiadis from Big Pie. And I'll also share briefly the perspective of Venture Friends. So that covers all the venture capital funds in Greece. And then we're happy to have with us Yannis Tsakiris, the Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Growth and Development, and Alex Charitsis, also the former Deputy Minister in the same ministry. So the two people, as I said before, who were both involved and enabled the Equifund program. So with that, let me take it to the VC crowd and briefly ask them to suggest to share with us how many companies they have supported, and maybe name a couple of their key successes. Maybe Katerina, you want to start?
Thank you, Apostole. I'm really happy to represent the Unifund team in this panel. We have invested in 23 companies up to now. 7 of them come from the university research space, and many of them actually from the broader university ecosystem. It's the most difficult question always to point out some of them, but I think I can point out FlexCar, as they're really growing aggressively with revenue. We have invested together actually in that, with revenues significant profits, but also from the research space, cases like Kinvent. They are selling to physiotherapists all around the globe. They have passed the threshold of 1 million, and they are in top clinics in US like Mayo Clinic, etc. But many other cases like really growing like Bibe Coffee, ExitB, B-Spot, Convert was in the Financial Times yesterday. Yes,
about all the portfolio. So Myrto, you're gonna briefly share some from the details from Metavalon?
Thank you, Apostole. It's also a pleasure for me to represent Metavalon here. So we're a 32 million euro fund. We started 3 years ago. Our activity so far, we've invested in 24 companies. We mainly invest in B2B companies and technical founders developing proprietary defensible technology. Some companies to point out are Better the Origin, who's using bioprocessing to convert waste into animal feed. Ferry Hopper, who's finally making it easy to book ferries across the Mediterranean, and also Biopix, who's releasing connected molecular medical device for scanning. A few years ago, we also did our first exit with Think Silicon, a semiconductors company that was sold to Applied Materials.
Very good. George, would you like to share with us about Marathon?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you all for the fantastic event. It's great to be with you in this panel tonight or today. With our first fund in Marathon, we made 10 investments. All of them are currently working with Fortune 500 companies, and the majority of them has already raised a Series A round. Together with a few announcements that are pending, our portfolio has raised north than 100 million euros so far. We also raised a second fund. A few months ago, we graduated happily from Equifund. I wouldn't call any portfolio companies a success yet. They've been growing well, but there are many things to be done. and we certainly look forward to it.
Cool. Dimitri?
Thank you, Apostole. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Seth, for organizing this wonderful event. So very happy to represent Velocity. We do pre-seed and seed, being the smallest fund in terms of assets under management, 24 million under management of the Equifund family. Right now, in the third year of our investment period, we have 18 investments. If I can call a success, one case a success, that would be possibly PushMe, which was Equifund's first exit, which was acquired in January last year by Tier Mobility, a leading mobility operator here in Europe. And about success, I would actually argue a few rising stars, maybe Surge, which is an Imperial spin-off active in the wider Parkinson and Parkinsonian disease symptoms space, where they produce a wearable device to monitor the symptoms, and quite possibly Instacar as well in the wider flexible leasing space for cars.
Great. And Aristo? You're on mute, Aristo, sorry. Aristo? Okay.
Yes, very, very happy to be here from Big Five Ventures among my colleagues. One thing that we say among us is that the people who selected the 6 teams actually did a great job, because I think everybody respects everybody else, and we think that everybody is doing a good job. And most of us are people who are not that experienced in VC, and the whole ecosystem is young. So what we have been doing, I think, is pretty good. We at Big Five Ventures have 45 billion under management, 2.5 years old. We have invested in 21 companies. Our focus is on what is called deep technology, which means strong intellectual property protection, or if not intellectual property necessarily in terms of patents, at least many years of R&D before a product is put into market. This characterizes almost all of our ventures. 2 examples I can point out, though I agree with George that it's too early to speak of successes. We haven't had exits or huge exits or anything like that. But just 2 examples so that our international audience can get a sense of what is happening. One example is TileDB, which is a new structure of databases for large data sets, a multidimensional array engine, which is ideal for very, very large data sets like you find in genomics, or you find in geospatial data, or in financial time series. It's a transformational technology, we believe. It's horizontal, and it can work across many verticals. And the founder is a Greek in Boston. And the second one, which is completely different, is medical devices. PD neurotechnology focused just on Parkinson's diseases, developed by 2 professors in the University of Ioannina. Hardware, which is a completely different business model, but that also has gotten all its accreditations and it started selling.
Cool. Just to briefly add from our side, Venture Friends, our second fund was a recipient of support from Equifund, and from that fund we've done 20 investments. And apart from InstaShop, which we all know because it was sold during the summer, we have a few companies that we can single out just because of traction, like Blueground, Plum, Spotaway. And with that, all of us obviously are very happy that we had the Equifund support. So let me now ask Yannis and Alexis to share their thoughts about Equifund. I mean, what in terms of how you see Equifund, what's your view in terms of its success, the KPIs that you're looking for, and are there any things that you would have done different? Who wants? Maybe Yanni, you're going to go first, and then we can hear from Alex.
Thank you, Apostole, and allow me also to thank the Federation of Greek Industries and Endeavor for this great event. For me, the journey when it comes to the equity and startup ecosystem starts many years ago in Greece in 2009, beginning of 2009, where through European Investment Fund, we set it up the first, let's say, the first part of this ecosystem that we are looking today. It was the Jeremy program, which supported the first technology funds in Greece. And it continued with Equifund in 2009. 2009 was Jeremy, 2016 was Equifund. And this really contributed a lot to what we see today in the Greek ecosystem, because, and I think it's a common sense, and keep this phrase, it's mostly all about money. So if there is financing, obviously, and where there is the correct financing, and this has been proven in Greece because of this continuous success, the ecosystem is growing. For me, Equifund, which currently is progressing very satisfactory. I think more than 150 million euro has been invested in around 120 companies. For me, is already a success. And when I say for me, as a policymaker, Equifund and Jeremy have achieved their goals and objectives. Was for fund managers to be set up, private funds to be raised, and investments to be done. Which I believe will be, if those investments are also profitable, then we will be extra happy that the Greek state, as a shareholder, indirect shareholder in those initiatives, will make also a profit. But when it comes to the policy, Equifund was a milestone, and it's 100% successful.
Great. And the goal of all of us being participants in the industry is to make Equifund a success. And Alexi, would you like to share your thoughts? You're on mute, Alexi, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Apostolos. Thank you for the invitation. I think it's very important that despite COVID, or even better because of COVID, that we engage into meaningful discussions about the economy. So I will try to just in 2 minutes to give you an insight on the logic behind Equifund. In 2016, as Yannis just said, we took a strategic decision in the Ministry of Economy and Development in terms of the optimum way to utilize the available fund in both national and European. It was our belief that the economy of knowledge should be at the core of this plan, and this means gradually shifting our production towards projects and services of high added value and full capitalization of the highly skilled workforce, and especially young graduates. So we therefore decided to engage together with our partners like the European Investment Fund in the development of new financial instruments through the utilization of European structural funds. And in terms of the structure, we focused on equity funding. That's what the market needed. That's what we anticipated as the best way forward. So we use this kind of tools in order to focus in incorporating research and innovation into the business environment. And that's how we created Equifund. And actually, that was not the only such program. We had other programs that proved very successful that continue till today, like Ερευνώ, Δημιουργώ, Καινοτομώ, which was an ESPA program that served the same more or less objectives. But let me say that I think that VCs are the right instruments to support such endeavors. But in Greece, there had been some attempts in the past, but we were lacking a substantial ecosystem in this respect. I think that's what Equifund managed to do, to provide the basis for such an ecosystem. We knew from market research that there was demand for equity funding in the Greek market, but also, and even more importantly, I would say, we expected that new reliable private funds would be created to invest in such schemes. And to be perfectly honest with you, when we created Equifund, we received a lot of criticism that we invested too much public money in it, in just one single program. But I think that the outcome proves that we were right. Yannis just said, and I agree with him, that it has proved to be a very successful tool. And actually, my view, and this is the feedback I've received from counterparts in other countries as well, is that now Equifund has created a new benchmark of good practice, not just in Greece, but on European level as well. So I think that's very important for our country and for our ecosystem in general. It's not just about one tool being successful, but it's a good advertisement for the whole economy as well, having such successful attempts, endeavors.
Exactly, and actually having you both here is a testament. It's a very positive thing, and it's important to keep in mind in the future, like how people from different political parties can find alignment around initiatives that are clearly benefiting the country. And we certainly thank you for that. So going back to the VCs on the panel, I wanted to ask, based on your experience, are there any specific sectors that you believe the Greek tech ecosystem, the Greek innovation ecosystem has a competitive advantage? Are there specific sectors who should attract more investment? Let me start by asking Myrto, and then Aristos can also, and Katerina can also share their opinion about that.
Right. Thank you for the question, Apostole. So I think what's important to notice is that the last 3 years since the Eco Fund started, we've seen a significant shift in terms of the companies that are being invested in. So out of our joint portfolio, I would say about 2/3 in terms of the companies that we've invested in, and over 80% of the capital that has been invested has been in B2B models and deep tech companies. So I think that's a clear trend. And I think in my mind, this proves that the country can produce technology companies that can productize and can commercialize. So I think that's something that's coming up as a trend. I think that it's also important to say that you're discussing models which are global from day one very oftenly. So that's something that the country is doing quite well, I think. So creating companies that can sell to the world from their inception. And if I had to say something on the sectors, my personal view is that the sectors are quite varied in terms of where the value is at the moment. I think naturally some companies that are very successful will create clusters around it. We've seen it in other countries, and we're seeing it in Greece as well with companies that have been successful in the past. But my sense is that things will diverge before they converge. So I see that a wide range of industries that has those characteristics, so deeper tech, ability to productize, ability to commercialize, and a kind of global business model will be more varied across sectors.
Makes sense. Aristo, what's your take?
The successes we have seen up to now have been mostly, not all of them, but mostly B2C models, InstaShop and Blue Ground is an excellent success and so on. I'm mentioning two that you like, Apostole. All of them, I would say all of the successes measured either by exits or by large valuations have been digital, with one recent exception though, which is Advent Technologies, which is in fuel cells and which listed in NASDAQ last month via SPAC. So we don't have just digital as successes. However, we have not yet created clusters around one thing, like Myrto has said. This is going to happen perhaps in the future. For me, the field that I think where we have a distinct comparative advantage, and we have not yet realized the potential, is biomedical. Not drug discovery or drug development, which it's a different type of animal, but everything else in the biomedical sector, medical devices, diagnostic kits, digital health services, bioinformatics, all that. And the reason why I see that, first of all, in our portfolio, without actually hunting very, very deeply into the healthcare sector, 1/3 of our portfolio is in that sector. I think the main reason why we are strong there, or potentially strong, is that this is a cross-disciplinary sector. It's not just software engineering. It requires chemists, it requires chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, etc., and doctors, of course. And in Greece, we have a lot of people who are highly qualified in those sectors who can't get a good job unless they get a job in a startup. And we have seen this in our startups. It has been very easy for them to bring Greeks back from Sweden or from Switzerland with PhDs in biochemistry and so on. And the other thing that I want to say on this sector is, because I also have a hat in SETEC, the Policy Advisory Council for Research and Technology, we are starting a long list of evaluations of research centers in Greece. And we are already seeing that it seems that the sector which has the deepest research capability and research quality seems to be in the biomedical sciences. The first panel yesterday showed Greeks who are very, very successful there. Somebody mentioned Spiros Artavanis, who is a professor of cell biology at Harvard, who is now the chairman of this council where I am. And he's looking very, very deeply into the Greek research community in biomedical, and he's very happy with what he sees. And therefore, I would, if I have to take one bet, I would say biomedical.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable bet. Katerina, what would you like to add?
Two short comments confirming what the other said. Health tech, for example, is something that also popped up in our portfolio as well, but also another group of companies around the data environment, big data, Internet of Things, AI, that came up naturally because I think we have great talent in the country. And in general, I consider all the cases around research to be a sector on their own. I think we have a lot of untapped potential there. It's a hard field. It requires a lot of work, a lot more work from our side, I think, as well. But the cases that really make it out of this area represent great successes and with very great
potential. Yeah, with
potential, but also very high impact as well, much higher than the cases that you find more easily out there in the market.
Yeah, and we'll get back to that in a bit, asking you about the universities and how can research be utilized. But just one question and around the advantages and disadvantages of the Greek ecosystem, because all of us who have been around for a few years had recognized the lack of funding, which was a major issue indeed for the Greek tech ecosystem. But I would like to ask Dimitri and George, who have witnessed the evolution of the ecosystem, whether they see other, first of all, other disadvantages and other advantages to our ecosystem. Maybe, Dimitri, you want to start, and then we can hear from George?
Of course. Thank you, Apostolos, for the question. As an advantage, I would argue that perhaps what I call a Greek entrepreneurial stamina is perhaps the one single soft skill we have developed throughout the past decade. I mean, let's not forget that the country has went through a very severe economic and social crisis. And this past decade has actually marked the birth and the acceleration of our industry. So the fact that Greek entrepreneurs couldn't take for granted things, simple things, even in their daily lives and their daily routines, that was pretty much the modus operandi for a startup based in London and elsewhere, really resonates with, I think, the especially ideation and pre-seed stage of our industry. You have to get creative. Now, as far as weaknesses, I wouldn't necessarily call it weakness. It's more like an opportunity. I think we need more people with significant experience in international sales and international business development, international partnership development. Greece, the Greek economy for the last decades had a regime of acting as a distributor of foreign tech in the Greek market. So our domestic professionals have, let's call it, less exposure in international markets as far as how to set up a partnership in Europe, across Europe, or across the United States is concerned. So we need more of these skills and experiences for the next stage of the ecosystem, which is quite instrumental because, as we argue, Greece as a domestic market is quite small. So
we have to go international.
Exactly. From day one, we need to consider international business development for our case.
Clear. International sales and marketing is very important. George?
Yeah, well, similar to what Dimitri said, I think we are privileged to have many well-educated and hard-working people in our community that are also hungry for success and loyal to their cause. If you ask me, these are the only required ingredients for, a company and an ecosystem at large to become successful. What's also equally crucial, I would say, is that a lot more experience is now starting to get accumulated across our ecosystem. And of course, the Greek diaspora is also helping a lot in this direction, as thousands of Greeks are working in tech. And they in their next trials, they're getting much better than before. Now, with regards to weaknesses, I have to say that while we have many great engineers, we have less great managers and less great salespeople. And at the same time, we tend to shy away typically from trying to articulate some more ambitious visions. That's also expectable. We are still a young ecosystem, and it will take time for these things to happen. If you ask me, the best remedy is, more successful startups so that people can see their peers succeed. And as a result, they are also going to become even more ambitious going forward.
Exactly. I think we need more success stories, and these are the natural growing pains of an ecosystem that will get there. And of course, it's clear that we're heading in the right direction. I want to briefly come back to what Katerina touched upon previously, which is the fact that we have Greek universities that we haven't seen, even though we hear about great researchers and about people like devoting their time and energy on that space. Sadly, we haven't seen strong innovation coming out or at least becoming commercial, getting commercialized. And I would like to ask, since Katerina from Unifund, they're very close with the universities, and also maybe Aristos and possibly Yannis for a brief opinion on the topic.
Thank you, Apostole. I wanted to share a very short case. 5 years ago, I was attending a team from Tel Aviv University, which is a top university globally, what they have there. And they had entrepreneurship courses across all departments, incubators, acceleration programs in the university, a very organized technology transfer office, several funds next to all this ecosystem. And honestly, when I looked at it, I said, oh, we have to be there in 20 years. That's what I thought. And I'm really enthusiastic. I'm really excited, actually, to see that we are almost there only 5 years afterwards. And I think this is a great message, seeing also how the Greek government supporting all that. The ministries collaborating with each other, the Ministry of Development, Ministry of Education, putting a lot of effort. Tech as well, but I think I really see this happening now. Much more positive momentum and structures organized around universities. So I'm optimistic as a person, but these things make me feel much more optimistic of what to follow.
All of us. Aisha, do you share the same optimism?
I'm not as optimistic as Katerina in the short term. I think we need a big effort to make this happen. And actually, Katerina, I should say, who is working in a special council by ESETEC on technology transfer, is doing a great job now on this. Our experience as a fund is we did go to a lot of research centers in universities and try to find teams that were interested. First of all, the majority of researchers and professors are just not interested. Either in patenting or in creating spin-offs or in working with industry and so on. We did find a few that were interested, but they didn't, most of them, not all, most of them didn't have a real concept of what is involved. They didn't understand that from the moment you have a very, very good result in the lab to the point where you have an actual product, it's a very hard process that they don't really know how to do. They're not willing to put in the time. Usually, they're not willing to give the responsibility to somebody else to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So what I feel is that we are at a stage where we cannot ask for a push out of the laboratories. We need a pull mechanism where you get people to go into the laboratories and convene and see what is there and negotiate with the researchers and create the patents and then sell them off, or the spin-offs and so on. So we as a fund actually created our own venture to do that, to be an IP exploiter, let me put it this way, called Athroa Innovations. But as a policy advisor, me and Katerina and other people are telling the government we need to put money into technology transfer offices, not in every single university, but have perhaps 5 big technology offices around Greece, focusing on certain sectors, having the know-how, and actually going there and doing the pull thing. I think this is the only way to go ahead.
So it's good that we have Yannis on the panel so that he gets the message one more time. Yannis, what do you think? You want to share something brief on that?
Yes, of course. I mean, I fully agree with what Aristos says and Katerina. It's obviously there is a lack of pipeline, particularly from the research institutions and universities, simply because researchers do not have the entrepreneurship mentality. However, I'm pretty sure that this will follow the general term change soon. From the part of the government, and this is something that I would like to announce here, within the next days we are procuring a new equity instrument which is destined to support seed and technology transfer investments. There I would like to correct a little bit Aristos. I think smart money shouldn't go to technology transfer offices, but rather in technology transfer funds. I'm sure he was meaning the same.
Well, both. You need both.
Of course, you need both, but it's very important to create equity financing vehicles for this area, which is not served or it's underserved currently from the innovation funds, and they do serve it as a necessity in order to create deal flow for their own benefit. So we strongly believe, and we're going to procure a 60 million equity financial instrument within the next days to support this type of investments, seed and technology transfer. And this is a piece of the puzzle of the equity ecosystem, which fits well with existing initiatives. In parallel, let me remind you that we are working together with the European Investment Fund on the angel investment part of the market. They're soon going to, or they're on due diligence for fund managers. We're also discussing with them how to approach impact investment, which is, I believe, also another area that we need to tackle. And let's also not forget the progress that Hellenic Development Bank of Investments, the ex-Taneo, has done so far, where actually currently there is more than 1.2 billion euros procured outside of public money for private fund managers and private investors to match. I mean, a few months ago, we procured a financial instrument for renewable energy and critical infrastructure equity financing. We have a co-investment facility. So, as I said, and I said you keep this phrase, it's all about money, and in particular, smart money. And I believe that we are on the right track with smart money within smart financial instruments, let's say, to see the growth of this ecosystem of innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship to flourish in a, how can I say, in a geometrical way.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm coming from this area. I was working on private equity and venture capital for many years. It's in my heart, and I'm strongly committed that as long as I'm here or I'm somewhere that I can help the Greek ecosystem, I will be around and provide as help as possible I can do.
Great. And actually this, I mean, you already answered this. You shared some great initiatives about the VC ecosystem, and I wanted to also give to Alexi the opportunity to discuss his thoughts about the VC ecosystem. Alexi, would you like to share what are your thoughts and your plans for the VC ecosystem?
Yes, Apostolos, very, very briefly. I always try to see the glass, let's say, half full. So I think that at the moment we finally have an active ecosystem that benefits many innovative businesses. We have all let's better say we are in the process of having successful exits. We have important M&As, etc. So the system is working, is progressing. Let's say. It is important to continue this recycling process for the public funding that has been reserved for equity fund and other VC projects. So I would expect that in the near future, we will see the same perseverance, the same reliability, the same credibility that we demonstrated when we created those instruments a few years ago. As long as the state has a return from these instruments, it can reinvest and leverage significant private funding in this process. And of course, as the ecosystem strengthens even further, we can have more private funding, increased participation of private funding in this scheme. So the available recycling or new public funding should be used, in my view, in higher risk projects with more added value. So my view is that the strategy for a new generation of financial instruments should be even more targeted than the previous generation of FIs, and promote even more cutting-edge technological business ideas, especially in the areas of green transition and what we call the fourth industrial revolution. But having said that, I will sort of contradict myself now, because to be perfectly honest with you, I don't believe so much in this sectoral discussion. I think it's all about the projects, and that's from my experience. It's about we have excellent people in many, let's say, different areas, but what we are lacking sometimes is setting together the right teams to execute the right projects. So this is where I would focus more, rather than putting all our money in one particular sector or the other. It's about setting the right teams and the right projects, and then everything will flow along. That's my view.
It will take its course, and that's what has happened actually.
Exactly.
Up to now, we have all invested in very different things. By the way, point taken for all of us in the panel. We have to keep our sleeves rolled up and continue so that we deliver returns, so that the public reinvests. Final question, which is a very important one, is what do you believe could help the Greek tech ecosystem grow and reach its full potential? And I would like to hear from George, who has been involved for many years in the Greek tech ecosystem, and then Mikto and Dimitris.
So first of all, I think we need to take a step back and realize how far we've gone throughout the last 10 years. This is a significant development and also achievement, I would say, because it's not anymore about if this ecosystem, this industry is going to grow, but the question of when, how fast, how big, etc., etc. And this is something to celebrate. If you ask me, I would like to be a bit more practical here. I would say that, as an industry and, as practitioners in the space, we might need to stop worrying that much about what the government does or will do, and switch back to focus on, the practical day-to-day company building, how we land the next customer, how we build a great team, how we build fantastic products that are going to be leading the respectful industries. And I think that as long as we are doing this, we also need to embrace time. Building a startup takes a few years. Building an ecosystem takes even more years. And, Rome wasn't built in a day. And the Greek startup industry is going to take some time to grow. And I think that's fine at the end of the day, as we all are in it for the long run.
Yes, makes sense. Victoria, quick one, because we're running out of time.
Sure. So I agree very much with George that you need time for things to mature, and we have to learn to be patient. So we'll all have to learn to, let things naturally progress. If I had to add two things, there would be, first of all, the way we learn is by doing. So I think we need to have more transactions, more initial investment, more follow-ons, more exits. And every time we do a transaction, it becomes easier. It becomes easier to co-invest with international funds. It becomes easier to convince companies to acquire a Greek company. And this has a multiplier effect, I think, for everyone involved. So for the founders involved, for the VCs and investors involved, for the angels, and even for professional services like lawyers, IP lawyers, accountants, technicians, etc. So we need more of that and then kind of leading by doing. The second thing is, I think it makes an amazing change when people become vested and invested in the ecosystem, especially people who have done it before. So we've been fortunate enough to co-invest with some of the entrepreneurs that have exited both in Greece and abroad. And I think this is a vote of confidence and as a way to supercharging, let's say, this natural kind of progression of the system is very, very strong. There are people who have done it before. It increases the ambitions of the entrepreneurs. It gives them practical advice, and it actually shows that people are willing to invest back in the country. So I think this is very, very important.
Yeah. Indeed.
Reach 10x, let's say.
Yeah. Dimitri?
I think really quickly, I think I will echo many of the speakers, including Minister Tsakis and former Minister Haritsis, by saying that we need positive news successes. Let's not forget that the upcoming Angel Fund is actually reflows from the Jeremy program, which is really important. It shows, this is what an ecosystem really is. At the same time, more exits will produce and increase the confidence of private investors, right? This is the fuel of our funds, private investments in the form of LPs who will increase their participation in our next funds and will increase the participation and the firepower of our industry as a whole. At the same time, success means more people with experiences, with money as angels, so they can ignite and support a new breed of entrepreneurs. And this is a wonderful circle to be in.
Exactly, totally agree. And we've seen this already happening, like people who had their exits reinvesting in the ecosystem, and this is great. Fantastic. I think it was great having you all here and sharing your opinions. Thank you very much. And I'm certain we have a great trajectory to continue on.
Thank you, Apostolos.
Thank you, Apostolos. Thank you.
It's been a very exciting, I think, 2 days, and I really thank everyone around the world, all the innovative Greeks who have taken the time to watch this launch event of a community that I hope will continue into the future with new initiatives like immediately you can begin checking out workintech.gr to check for jobs or possibly even cooperation opportunities or just take some time off, come to Greece and help a Greek startup, all the way to discussions that we will be organizing in the future, probably more domain-specific, and gather experts that can share their views. We will have a lot more networking events where people can meet each other. We will put together a matchmaking platform where Greek companies can meet and work with larger or equivalent size foreign companies where Greeks can help us make that connection, as well as obviously more interesting sort of debates rather than discussions like the ones we've had over the past couple of days, where I think everyone agreed, but there are plenty of areas where we disagree, and we will probably launch a debate format to capture that dynamic. Now, where are we today? And how far can we go? I think everybody is wondering. The reality is that when I started 20 years ago upstream with Alex Vratskidis, essentially it was a very lonely place. Tech in Greece literally didn't exist, apart from very few companies. And 20 years later, we have been making steps where we have an ecosystem now that is worth about 4 billion in my calculations in terms of market cap, and it employs approximately just over 5,000 people. Now, it started with exits or capital raises in the single digit or double digit in millions, like, for example, Innoetics, BugSense, Peat, eFood, and they were the first. Then we started moving to triple-digit exits or capital raises with upstreams, Automotive, InstaShop, Blueground, NetData, Workable, Omilia, Epignosis, Viva, and Scrooge. And I believe that's the full list. But we haven't really yet, as Christos Trifonas correctly said, seen that breakthrough to unicorns or high triple-digit exits or capital raises. And I think whilst we have to recognize that a lot of progress has been made, a useful reminder of where we can get to is just look at what the Greeks abroad have achieved. Granted, in far more developed ecosystems, granted, they have the full support of these ecosystems and the financing, but companies founded by Greeks or people of Greek descent are worth 40 billion. And I'm not, of course, counting life sciences, because if I were to add just Biogen and Regeneron that we had participating in our panels yesterday, they alone are something like 90 billion. So I think we've got a long way to go, and we need to be happy with what we've achieved so far, but at the same time, we really do need more ambition. We need more pressure. 4 billion is not a big number. 5,000 people is still not a big number. And we really need breakthrough success cases that will drive the ecosystem faster. So, Victoria Coleman spoke a bit last night about the Silicon Valley ecosystem and what a complete ecosystem looks like. And she went into a lot of detail that I encourage you to go back and watch. But one thing that was quite critical and essential was that this ambition to build great companies begins very early on. From the universities, all the way to research labs, all the way to then setting up your first company, and then potentially succeeding and selling your first company, but then just keep going. People like Christos Trifonas, again, who've done this 5 times, again and again and again. So I think if there's one thing to learn from these great Greeks or international Greeks that we have, is ambition. We need to be more ambitious. And we need to work together. Of course, we'll compete in many levels. There's no problem with that at all, as long as we are respectful and recognize that there are some areas in which we will be competing, but fundamentally, we can all sit in the same table, have discussions like the one you saw just before, and conclude on what we're missing. Now, innovative Greeks around the world can certainly help us get there faster. And I'll close by just saying that this has been a fantastic first meeting. I think it provided inspiration. I think it provided useful information. It provided a benchmark as to where we are, but we don't yet have a clear view as to where we can get to. And this is quite vital if we want to set out a course for the next 5 years. So expect more from this forum, from this community, and I encourage everyone to be as active as you possibly can, and I can guarantee you'll be hearing from us very soon. Till then, goodbye, good night, good afternoon for those of you in the States, and Godspeed.
If there is one concept that describes who we are and what we do, it is innovation. That is the single word that captures the true essence of our efforts. But what is the true meaning of innovation? Is it just a vague definition? Is it a badge on the shirt of an employee? Or is it a poster on the cafeteria wall? No. Innovation constitutes the backbone of our corporate DNA. We are practically made of it. We live by it. We breathe it. And it can be easily summed up in two simple words: question everything. One solution against another. One idea against another. The better for the good. The best for the better. Nothing less, nothing more. It is our team of creative thinkers that gets us there. People who know that in order to agree, they must first see things differently. The 1,700 IT professionals of 20 different nationalities across the Intrasoft Group are the people behind all the innovative, breakthrough technology products and services we deliver across 70 countries. From our cutting-edge e-customs technologies to digital analytics solutions, our people know well that innovation, first and foremost, is an exercise for daring hearts and brains. A leap out of one's comfort zone. Innovative minds are the reason we grow strong for the last 20 years. Because innovation is not written, it is coded into our DNA.
Για περισσότερα από 30 χρόνια, το Ινστιτούτο Βιομηχανικής Εκπαίδευσης και Κατάρτισης προσφέρει γνώσεις και δεξιότητες για πρωτοπορία. Με προγράμματα προσαρμοσμένα στις ανάγκες των συνεργατών μας, εκπαιδευόμενων και επιχειρήσεων. Προγράμματα που ενσωματώνουν την καινοτομία και εξωστρέφεια, που αναδεικνύουν δεξιότητες, συνδέουν τη γνώση με την αγορά εργασίας, προετοιμάζουν για τις εξελίξεις. Με παραρτήματα και σύγχρονες δομές που διασφαλίζουν την ποιότητα και αρτιότητα των υπηρεσιών μας σε κάθε γωνιά της χώρας μας. Διεθνείς πιστοποιήσεις και διαπιστεύσεις που επιβραβεύουν τη δράση μας και επισφραγίζουν την ποιότητά μας. Εφαρμοσμένη τεχνολογία μάθησης. Υπερσύγχρονα, πιστοποιημένα εργαστήρια για άμεση και μεθοδευμένη αλλαγή του τρόπου δουλειάς. Συνδέουμε τη θεωρία με την πράξη. Την πράξη με το αποτέλεσμα. ΙΒΠ. Γνώσεις και δεξιότητες για πρωτοπορία.